Chapter 1667. Maligos suddenly laughed out loud. Ha ha ha. Destroy me? Don't make me laugh. You despicable person. Didn't you take advantage of my mental weakness to seize control of the elements? Now I'm not crazy. I just want to ask, how can you beat me? The strong elemental fluctuations shook the entire atmosphere in the arena. Even after Maligos died and became a Dracolic, this characteristic did not weaken. Seizing control of the elements was a test of a pharaoh's basic skills. Although it was basic skills, it tested many things: elemental affinity, understanding of the habits and structure of the elements, the level of instilling the will into the elements. It did not make sense at all. Logically speaking, if one wanted to attack the Wormrest Temple or launch a surprise attack elsewhere, one should have gathered all the superior forces. For a demigod like Duque, who had powerful teleportation abilities, the feat meant almost nothing. In the eyes of the other pharaoh, Duque's control of the frost elements around him was snatched away almost immediately, and he looked miserable. Huh. What are they doing? Humiliating? Perhaps. But as long as I destroy you, I will regain my dignity. Getting angry with a lunatic would only make one as tasteless as a lunatic. Duque would not do such a thing. Unknowingly, the huge pit in the arena actually showed signs of being sealed up again. Not far away, Salyafar and Big Salyafar had already pulled out their weapons, but they were a little embarrassed. Although Maligos, who was now a Dracolic, was below the hole along the edge of the arena, they only had one chance to jump down. If they missed it, they would fall into the bottomless hole below. Duque scolded, "Thief?" A dragon aspect who betrayed the Pantheon, abandoned his duty, and threw himself into the arms of the undead. And you have the nerve to say that the Titan rune is his? Stop making me laugh, okay? Whether it was in the original history or in the game, Arthas was just a nest, hiding in the ice-crowned fortress and waiting to be overthrown. The cold wind that seemed to blow forever stopped, and in its place was a turbulent flow of elements that seemed to be in a somewhat violent state. Right now, the situation of king against king and general against general could only be considered as restraining each other. Alexstrasza. Maligos has become a Dracolic. He's here with me. Duque narrowed his eyes and secretly sent a magic message to the crowd to evacuate the arena. Pa, 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 pa. The huge icicles were continuously shattered, and then turned into ice shards, accumulating at the entrance of the pit. The physiological structure of the human body was not naturally formed for magic. However, Maligos gave Duque this feeling. It was as if every cell in his body, as well as his soul, could be filled with elements and cause the elements to resonate. The question was, what was Earthes trying to do? Duque was too lazy to continue. He spread his hands and said, "Sigh. Arguing with a psychopath. I only did it because I suddenly had a brain cramp. All right. Maligos, since you dare to appear in front of me as an undead, are you ready to be destroyed by me forever? You didn't expect it to be me, did you? Despicable thief." Duke Marcus. In the huge pit, Maligos raised his head high and stared at Duque in the air with eyes that were like hellfire. Like a spider web, the veins of the magic net crisscrossed in the air behind Duque. Different magic net channels emitted different colors of light. Both sides knew that they were both demigods. Whether it was the Red Dragon Queen's side or Duque's side, they could not do anything to each other in a short period of time. Once the battle dragged on, it would turn into a decisive battle. Although this was the periphery of the ice-crowned glacier, it was not as effective as the ice-crowned fortress. Hundreds of hands of magic appeared in midair and enveloped the dark pit in a hemispherical shape. Arcane missiles the size of water tanks formed a heavy rain that poured into the pit. The real battle was between Duque and Maligos. F***ck. As expected of a veteran demigod, Duque could not help but curse. Dozens of sharp icicles the size of pillars shot into the sky like rockets, shooting at Duque in the air. Of course, the second fool was not a weak lowly. At least, she would not cause trouble everywhere like she was now. Duque had the system genie. With more than 1,000 threads, he could independently inject different willpower to snatch frost elements. However, in terms of elemental affinity, Duque naturally lost. Duque was called a thief because he had taken the Titan rune that originally belonged to Malygos. However, Duque did not feel guilty at all. The ports of the 4 elemental realms suddenly enlarged, so that more elements could enter the magic net. It could not be helped. Beastmen could not fly. The magic net that should not have been visible to the naked eye became visible due to the extremely exaggerated elemental charge. Betrayal? I am clearly the master of all magic and elements in Azeroth. You damn thief. You took advantage of my moment of inattention to steal the secrets of magic and create the magic net that blasphemes the magic elements of this world. The real traitor is you. Malygos roared angrily. Compared to Malygos, Duque was more like a mountain king in the frost elemental realm, while the former blue dragon king was a natural king, the master of the entire frost elemental realm. Pursing his lips, Duque waved his hands quickly. Combined with the incantations in his spiritual sea, Duque began his counterattack. Bastard. You. Duque suddenly realized something and became furious. Just as Duque saw Malygos, who was either an undead dragon or a Dracolic, appear, he received an urgent message from Alexstrasza. Duque, come over immediately. Arthas has appeared. He's standing on the inner side of the Gate of Divine Wrath, confronting me. The butterfly effect was interesting at times, but it was also a pain in the ass at other times. Almost as soon as the Spectral Dragon King finished speaking, Duque suddenly felt that he had lost control of the frost elemental realm in this area. The only one who could help Duque was Jaina. She summoned an ice pedestal and supported herself in mid-air. However, this pedestal was not safe, as it could be smashed by Malygos at any time. Ha ha ha. You claim to be a demigod of the magic net. How can you allow your control of the frost elemental realm to be stolen? Don't you feel ashamed? Malygos laughed maniacally as he waved his skinless, almost bony front claws. Chapter 1668. Hee. Have you finally realized it? It's too late, Duke Marcus. Malygos' voice came from below. That's right. You're so happy to have troops stationed at the edge of our territory. Killing a bunch of new heroes from the Alliance army should be enough to make you feel a little heartache. As soon as Malygos' voice fell, all the high-ranking officers of the Alliance army, including Duque, felt a toothache. What an uproar. Duque couldn't accuse Malygos of being a demigod for being so shameless. What the former Blue Dragon King was doing was the same as what Duque wanted to do after spring, weakening the enemy's war potential. Malygos was only here to restrain Duque. The huge and thick layer of ice cut off the connection between the cave and the outside world. The frost element that Malygos had absolute dominance there even rejected the entry of arcane elements, not to mention opening the portal. Even if Duque wanted to save them, he couldn't save Nahok and the others. Almost at the same time, cries for help sounded everywhere in Duque's magic communication network. The entire Alliance army surrounding the Iceground Glacier area had reports of being attacked by the Calamity army. Most of them were ambushed by gargoyles known as Fortress Watchers. These dark magic creatures with the ability to fly at high speed used the blizzard as cover to directly cross the defensive airspace of the front line and attack the Alliance army on the second line. Not only that, countless ice bridges extended down from the cliffs of the Iceground Glacier area, forming grooves that looked like slides. The stitched abominations, which were sewn from more than 10 corpses, flew along these ice slides directly to the various Alliance army positions. The fat abominations were directly thrown over in the form of an air raid, forcing the Alliance army to fight in close combat. Just this alone made Arthas's surprise attack a great success. Counterattack. Counterattack. Push the enemy back. Even though the Alliance army commanders were shouting at the top of their lungs. In the harsh snowstorm that Arthas had deliberately condensed and made it impossible to see anything 5 meters away, it was completely extravagant to form a formation. Fortunately, the communication system of the Alliance was supported by the Weave and had not been destroyed. Otherwise, the situation would have been even worse. Even so, they were forced to fight in close combat. It was conceivable that the Allied forces would suffer heavy losses this time. Even though his face was ashen, Duque still managed to squeeze the words out of his mouth through gritted teeth. Earthies, well done. The Alliance camp was filled with fear and panic. "We can't hold on any longer," an Alliance soldier shouted. The Alliance commanders shouted at the top of their lungs in the howling wind. "Retreat! Retreat! No, we're not leaving. For the glory of the Alliance." The leader of the recruits had just finished speaking when he was slapped by his commanding officer. "Idiot. If they all died here, they would all become immortals, which in turn would increase the burden of the Alliance in the future, harming his own comrade. Let's go. All of you go. Don't hold up the rear. Run as many as you can," the second lieutenant of the Alliance fiercely ordered. "Then what about you, sir?" The recruit was a little confused. "Someone has to collect the bodies of our brothers." "Collect the corpse? Cut the crap. All of you get lost. Don't be a hindrance here." The second lieutenant of the Alliance kicked the recruits' butt and chased them away while cursing and beating them. As he watched the recruits disappear into the wind and snow behind him, the second lieutenant of the Alliance lit a cigarette with a windproof lighter. Unfortunately, it was extinguished after just a bit. "Sigh, brothers." In front of his eyes, many swaying figures appeared. Every single one of them wore shining silver armor with a blue background and golden edges of a lion's head pattern. It was just that eye-catching. However, these faces that were incomparably familiar all became incomparably sinister. Some of them were missing half a face, some of them had their heads hung because half of their throats had been bitten off, and there were even more who didn't have complete limbs. They could only drag their broken upper bodies as they crawled on the ground, leaving behind long and shocking bloody traces. In front of the magic communication device, the second lieutenant of the Alliance picked up the microphone. "Hello. Frontline, position N567. Second Lieutenant John Ganner calling for Mountain Eagle." "Mountain Eagle is here. N567, please speak." The image of a female Alliance soldier's head lit up in the magic mirror. "Position N567 has already fallen. I had the last group of soldiers withdraw. I am already the last living person in this position. If you don't want this place to become a paradise for the undead, please fire at me as soon as possible." The female Alliance soldier stared blankly for a long time before replying with a trembling voice. "Mountain Eagle understands. Second Lieutenant Ganner, do you have any last words?" "Long live the Alliance." After lightly saying these words, the second lieutenant of the Alliance, who wasn't much older than the recruits, was torn apart by his former comrade and dragged backwards. From start to finish, the female soldier saw that on the face of the second lieutenant of the Alliance, until the very last moment, there was still a faint smile. 3 minutes later, a fierce rumbling sound rang out from the artillery position behind position N567. The berserk artillery fire instantly drowned out the entire position, breaking down all of the humanoid figures in the entire position into components. At this moment, Duque's heart was like a raging storm, rising and falling uncontrollably. It had been a long, long time since the Alliance had suffered such a loss. Relying on their memories of history, the Alliance's campaigns had always been successful. Compared to the results of the battle, their losses were almost negligible. This made Duque, and even the entire Alliance, involuntarily enter a state of almost blind optimism. Today, Arthas had taught them a good lesson. Duque didn't know how many soldiers they would lose in this surprise attack, but it was definitely more than 10,000. This was the largest single battle loss since Duke became the Alliance's commander-in-chief. It wasn't to the extent of hurting their muscles and bones, but it was definitely enough to be recorded in the history of the war for all the people of the Alliance to remember and learn from. "Have I been slapped in the face?" Duque smiled bitterly. Onyxia came. She used the ultra-high temperature of deep breath to burn the thick layer of ice. Coupled with Duque's fire magic, this was only able to suppress Maligos by a little. The layer of ice in the pit of the arena was decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, everyone knew that at this pace, by the time they forced Maligos to escape, the corpses of the Alliance warriors, led by Milhouse, would have turned cold. Duque could even foresee that when they killed their way to the bottom of the pit, they probably wouldn't even be able to collect their corpses. With Arthas's vengeful personality, he would definitely turn these warriors into immortals, and place them in Ice Crown Fortress to wait for the arrival of the Alliance army after strengthening them. Perhaps there would be another lich called Millhouse Mana Storm. Just as Duque's thoughts were running wild, a shrill scream suddenly came from under the ice. Bastard! What are you doing? Who are you? Ah! Chapter 1669. If it weren't for the holy light under the ice that was as bright as the sun, Duke would definitely think that Malygos was a lunatic. His dragon Gu had split into two wills and then directed and acted on his own. It was true that Malygos was the pharaoh of all elements, but his power definitely did not include the holy element. It was obvious that a top-tier holy knight had ambushed Malygos. This holy light was definitely not ordinary. Even Riataline and Merit, who were known as the top holy knights in the Alliance, were slightly inferior to this holy light. Duque's head was about to explode, but he still could not figure out which fellow's holy light was so powerful. Moreover, this holy light gave him an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Unfortunately, due to the extremely surging and evil frost elemental energy of Malygos, his perception was rather blurry. Even the system elf could not give an accurate judgment. Could it be that Turalian and the others have returned? Isn't this too much of a coincidence? Duque muttered to himself. The dragon lich's crazy voice came from below again. No. I am the king of magic of Azeroth. I am the original god of magic. All elements must be under my control of the magic net. Oh no, go back? Yes, my master. As Duque, Jaina, Onyxia, and Salyafar watched in astonishment, Malygos' elemental reaction left the arena at high speed through the underground tunnel. Malygos ran away with his tail between his legs, and the thick layer of ice was no longer a problem. The doubts in his heart grew stronger. Duque could not wait to break the ice. He left the Black Dragon Princess here to continue melting the ice while he teleported to the lowest level of the cave with Jaina. Stepping out of the portal, the first thing that came into view was the huge corpse of the Arachne King, Enubalak. This four-legged, two-pincer beetle king's evil soul had already dissipated. The double-headed sword that was imbued with a holy aura was the weapon that gave it the fatal blow. Duque recognized it immediately. This was the Ashkandi sword of the Brotherhood. There was no mistaking the scarlet sword hilt, and the two red dragon heads that formed the sword's edge. Although this item had considerable historical significance, no one in the current Alliance heroes would ever use this low-level epic weapon again. Soon, Duque found the answer he was looking for. Duque's eyes widened. He almost thought that his eyes were deceiving him. Even though the weathering of old age had already covered his face, even though the pressure of time had made this old man a little hunchbacked, Duque could still recognize him at a glance based on the iconic white armor with red edges. Alexandros. That's right, standing in the middle of the dark cave was an old friend of Duque's, Old Mograine. Why are you here? Aren't you retired? While Duque asked, he finally noticed the tall, stalwart figure beside Old Mograine, who was smiling bitterly. It was a typical Death Knight. Looking at the Death Knight's face that was 70% similar to the young Mograine, Duque understood everything. I didn't expect it to be you, Darian. Duque sighed. It was a mess. It was a F***king mess. Sometimes, Duque had to admire his own ability to stir up trouble. Because of his appearance, Azeroth's history had already been turned upside down. Old Mograine had retired, but he was still full of vigor. He had retired because he was disheartened. After all, the betrayal of his eldest son, Reynold, and the murder of his second son, Darian, with his corpse taken away had deeply affected Old Mograine. Since Old Mograine had appeared here without a word and with his youngest son who had turned into a Death Knight, there was only one answer. Answer me, Darian Mograine, have you broken free from the Lich King's shackles? Yes, Your Excellency Duke Marcus. Darian knelt on one knee, held the helmet in his left hand, and lightly touched the ground with his right hand as he saluted Duque. Duque looked around and saw the Alliance warriors who were still relatively spirited. He also saw the Death Knights standing at the side with their two-handed greatswords in their hands. He also saw the Wagri twins who had turned into soul dregs. Duque was even more certain of his judgment. All right. I'm not an unreasonable guy who sticks to the rules. Tell me the story of you and your subordinates. Thank you, Your Excellency Marcus. Darian's cold face squeezed out a happy smile. In the original history, old Mograine died early due to the betrayal of his eldest son, Reynold. After his father's death, Darian participated in and led the Silver Dawn's attack on Naxxramas. He defeated his father in battle and took back the fallen Ashbringer. Then, under the guidance of his father's soul, he went to see his brother, Reynold. However, after the brothers met, Reynold attacked Darian without any explanation. At this time, old Mograine's soul appeared and killed Reynold. Darian did not know the ins and outs, but seeing his father's soul kill his brother with his own hands, he was confused. Later, he found his father's good friend, Tyrion Fordring, who told him that only the power of love could release his father's soul. Darian then joined the battle against Arthas and the Scourge. He waved Ashbringer and cut through all the obstacles until he met the culprit, Kel'Thuzad, who had turned his father into a Death Knight. After realizing that his sword could not stop this powerful necromancer, he stopped his horse, thought of his love for his father, and stabbed Ashbringer into his chest. This action summoned 1,000 heroic spirits buried under the chapel, thus defeating the Scourge force. After that, Darian's body was brought back by Kel'Thuzad and turned into a Death Knight. In this life, Darian's experience was not so legendary. After his brother betrayed him, he was killed and directly taken away to become a Death Knight. He did not belong to Kel'Thuzad, but directly belonged to Arthas and was crowned with the title of Great Lord. He led the Akiris Death Knights to guard the Black Front Fortress in the northwest of the Iceground Glacier. Originally, the story would end here. However, things changed because of Duque and Alexstrasza's heavy injuries to Arthas. Darian said in a deep voice, "At that time, Your Excellency and the Red Dragon Queen injured Arthas, which made the Lich King's soul shackles on us lessen a lot. However, this was not enough to free us from the Lich King's control. So I used the soul connection and found my father." Chapter 1670. Duque turned his head and glared at old Emohe. "You really dared to do that?" Old Emo blushed and stammered, "Alas! I've been loyal to Lord Darren for most of my life. I've fought trolls, orcs, demons and undead. If my bloodline caused trouble for the kingdom and the alliance, I wouldn't be able to rest in peace. So I..." Duque rolled his eyes. "So you sneaked into Northrend and found your way to the Black Edge Knights' camp? Weren't you afraid that you would become the new 4 horsemen of the apocalypse?" I felt very guilty. I felt sorry for the alliance. I wanted to report to you alone many times. But I chose to keep the appointment. I waited for Darian outside the Iceground Glacier. Old Mograine said it casually, but who could understand his feelings? After so many inner struggles, both of his sons had become Death Knights. One was a shameless betrayal, and the other was a temporary sinking that might still have redemption. One was honor, duty and loyalty, and the other was bloodline, feelings and hope. Duque admitted that he didn't know what to do if he exchanged his identity with Mograine. Either choice was not wrong. No matter which choice it was, it could lead to extremely terrifying consequences. If he wasn't a transmigrator, he could never foresee the independence and rise of the Black Edge Knights, let alone the reaction of the Alliance. After all, before this moment, even if the Alliance turned a blind eye to the Horde's undyings, they might not accept a group of Death Knights. Even if they were neutral. Old Mogaine's gaze seemed to look into the distant past, the time when his 2 children were still young. "I dedicated half of my life to the kingdom and the rest to the Alliance. I didn't retire until I couldn't fight anymore. I'm ashamed of my selfishness. I don't deserve to be a paladin who spreads the holy light." Old Emo sighed. "When I came to Northrend, I listened to the whispering wind and gazed at the broken world. I looked at the scenery that seemed to be the end of the world. It was like a harsh place where nothing was born, but I felt that the world was so beautiful. It seemed that everything could be started again. I thought that since even a Nastrian could break free from the Lich King's shackles, my youngest son should have a chance too." At this point, old Emo pulled open his breastplate, which contained the latest explosive pack of the Alliance. "I won't let the Alliance soldiers have to face a Death Knight named Alexandros Mograine. If necessary, I will self-destruct. A Death Knight without a body isn't strong." At this moment, Darian lowered his head and said in a deep voice, Please don't blame my father. This is just the wish of a group of undead who still love the Alliance and desire that their compatriots can still be happy. We don't ask for anything in return. Even if we have to charge towards the Ice Crown Fortress first, and use our destruction to pave the way for the Alliance, we will have no regrets. Duque closed his eyes as if he was deep in thought. Almost at the same time, Duque received the news that the Calamity Troop had begun to retreat. Duque sighed. I can't promise you anything, but I will give you a chance to state the situation of you and your Black Edge Knights and your wishes in the Alliance's Throne Conference. Whether or not to accept you, or how to treat you, will be decided after the leaders of the Alliance vote. Thank you very much. Mograine and Mograine said in unison. Not taking action on the spot was already giving them face. Convening the Throne Conference for this actually meant that Duque had given them the green light. Otherwise, even if Duque killed Mograine and Mograine on the spot, no one could say anything wrong. The defensive battle was over. The Alliance's battle line didn't retreat. Instead, Duque ordered to strengthen the defense. The trenches, pillboxes, and other fortifications at the front line were turned on 24/7. The wealthy Duque kept transferring elements from other elemental realms to replenish the energy of the shields. The commanders of the Alliance chased the soldiers who were warm out of the barracks and strengthened the fortifications again. The army gathered at the cliffs of Storm and the Crystal Song Forest, while the rest of the areas were patrolled by the wyverns of the Sleeping Dragon Temple. There were also enough reserves left in the Northwind Taiga and other places, ready to counterattack at any time. 3 days later, the Throne Conference began in Naxxramas. Half of the Alliance's leaders attended, while the rest watched and voted through the magic mirror. When Mograine and Mograine gave their speeches, expressing that the Black Edge Knights were willing to fight together with the Alliance, the leaders fell into a long silence. Then, it was limited to whispers in the magic communication network. Unexpectedly, the first to speak was William. Is it okay to break the boundary between the dead and the living just like that? Today, the Alliance accepted the Death Knights as temporary allies. What about tomorrow? Closer cooperation? And then integration into the Alliance? What about the legacy of the kingdom? Accepting the undead would definitely be the biggest reaction from the humans. Perhaps long-lived creatures like the elves, dwarves, gnomes and Draenei didn't feel anything. Didn't they see how Kale, that's waited for thousands of years for a Nastrian to die? Was he forced to wait for an extremely long time until something happened? Among the leaders of the 7 great human kingdoms, Kaizi seemed to be the kind of guy who didn't feel anything about this topic. The problem was that there were still 3 leaders in the Alliance who were freaking immortal. If there was an issue of inheritance, it would definitely be between William and Donnas, the 2 brothers who had suffered the same fate. They would also be the first to speak. Be it the 2 of them or the other human leaders, they were actually not worried about the Black Edge Knights themselves, but the impact it would cause on the ethics of human society. Donna's Trollbane used his finger to tap on his throne for a while before saying, Commander Marcus, first of all, I would like to ask, is it the Alliance's absolute policy to accept more forces that can be accepted? Duque said resolutely, the Burning Legion will definitely return. In 10 years, no more than 20 years, a war of survival with Azeroth as the battlefield will begin. I think the scene of Archimonde's arrival and the destruction of the Dalagen is still fresh in most people's minds, right? Everyone was silent. Magni said, the tribe accepts the Forgotten Ones because the tribe has the tradition of using Death Knights. But the tribe is not the Alliance. Why do we believe that the Death Knights of the Black Edge Knights won't turn on the Alliance, and all the living at the critical moment? Both Mograine and Big Mograine shuddered at the same time. They couldn't say for sure about this. Chapter 1671. At this moment, Duque stood up. He first filled himself with holy light, and then switched to his shadow form, becoming a pure black man. Where there is light, there will be shadows. In fact, there are already some priests in the Alliance who have completed the switch between holy and shadow forms. We call these priests who focus on attack, shadow priests. Since the power of the shadows can arm our priests and warlocks, why can't we believe in the kindness of a group of Death Knights? Magni shook his head. I have no intention of targeting this. I think that includes me, the other leaders, and the people. We all need a convincing proof. Duque raised his hand. All right then. The boundary between life and death is not as clear as everyone thinks. I know that there are more than 1,000 souls sleeping under the Light's Hope Chapel. Let Darien and his ebon horsemen face the valiant spirits. If they are recognized by the souls, I believe the people will not have any objections. Duke changed the topic and looked at William and Donna's. As for inheritance, why don't we do it this way? When a person really dies, since he has crossed the boundary between life and death, this person will be defined as losing all assets other than his personal equipment. Unless he still chooses to fight for the Alliance, let him return to dust, dust to dust. William and Donna's looked at each other and said at the same time, then we have no objections. Seeing that the leaders of the Alliance had almost reached a consensus, Imriel also fell silent. It could be considered as acquiescence. Duque raised his hands and stretched out all his fingers. Everyone, we don't have much time. The next 10 years will be the most turbulent 10 years for Azeroth. Even if we defeat the Lich King Arthas, there are still many evil existences in this world. For example, there are scattered demons, dark forces that believe in evil cults, and remnants of the Black Dragon race. We will most likely have to face the other two ancient gods, Yashaji and Enzoth. We don't have time to relax. So my request to the Alliance is to unite all the forces that can be united, and at the same time, put aside any disputes that might cause conflicts until after the final battle with the Burning Legion. But on the other hand, if we are faced with a situation where we have no choice but to send troops, then we must not hesitate and directly send troops to destroy all the unrest in the bud. Duque clenched his fingers into a fist and smashed it down. It was clearly a simple movement, but because Duque had unintentionally released a small amount of elemental energy, this punch had the power of a war hammer. Something seemed to shatter in the air. Were those the shackles of the soul? Or was it an untimely tradition? No one went back to care. Compared to the fate of the entire race and even the entire planet, these were all trivial matters. As soon as Duque finished speaking, voices of agreement and approval came from the crowd of thrones. The throne meeting ended just like that. Old Mograine came up, his mouth trembling. In the end he could only say, "Thank you." Duque pursed his lips into a smile and patted the old man who had spent most of his life in the army, broken the shackles of fate, and fought for the Alliance until his death. "Don't thank me. If you want to thank me, wait until Darien passes the appraisal of the hero spirit." Old Emo hurriedly said, "That's not a problem. I have already asked His Majesty Menethil, Beneticus, and Tyrion to cast holy light on Darien." The holy light did not destroy the body and soul of him and his men. Without needing Old Emo to press him, Darien had already bowed deeply. "It's all thanks to Sir Marcus' guidance." Duque's smile grew wider. "I have saved myself, and I have also saved many evil souls that the outside world believed had fallen into the abyss. One more is not much, one less is not little. As long as you can pass, it proves that your heart is pure enough, and your will is firm enough. Go. As long as you pass, I will propose to give the Black Blade Knights an independent status." In fact, everyone knew that this was just a formality. Under the witness of tens of thousands of Rotterdam citizens, and over 1,000 warriors of the Scarlet Cross Legion and the Silver Dawn, dozens of Death Knights led by Darien withstood the holy water baptism of the Light's Hope Cathedral and the test of the hero spirits. They even miraculously proved that they could also recover from their injuries under the healing of the holy light. At first, Arthas was a little happy that the Calamity Troop had dealt a blow to the Alliance, but the news of the Black Blade Knight's betrayal immediately made him very unhappy. Almost on the same day he received the news, he ordered the Calamity Troop to launch a strong attack on the Black Blade Knight's camp. However, all the attacks became useless with Duque's arrangement. Hodier, the guardian of the Ice Shrine Odor, and Turawan, the Ice Warden, were directly stationed in the Black Blade Knight's fortress according to Duque's request. Not only them, but Calegos, who had just been appointed as the Blue Dragon King, and the few remaining members of the Blue Dragon Legion were also thrown into the Black Blade Knight's air force by Duque. With 3 demigod powerhouses stationed, Arthas could not do anything. The The status and combat power of the Guardians were not inferior to that of the dragon aspects, especially Hodier. This kind of cold area was Arthas' home ground, so was it not for Hodier? A surprise attack was fine. However, if the surprise attack failed, Arthas might fall into a protracted battle. When Duque, Alexstrasza, and the others arrived, the two fools would not have a chance to return to Icecrown Fortress. It was no exaggeration to say that the Alliance army used Darien's betrayal to drive a ruthless nail into the Icecrown Glacier. It became a fishbone in Arthas' throat, making him very uncomfortable. Under normal circumstances, if they did not attack the Gate of Heaven's Wrath, the Alliance army would have to attack from the low terrain of the Crystal Song Forest to the north to enter Icecrown Fortress. Then, following the terrain, they would have to go around a huge protrusion in the deep valleys of the plateau before finally reaching Icecrown Fortress. Along the way, they would also be attacked from the cliffs. This was an absolute taboo for military strategists. Only when they had no other choice would they carry out such an attack. Now, with the recovery of Otter and the betrayal of the Black Blade Knights, the Alliance army was able to suppress the Calamity Army's forces in the northwest and northeast of Icecrown Glacier. This was especially so for the Shadow Vault, where the Black Blade Knights were. With this nail, the Calamity Army would not be able to station a large number of troops in the Iron Wall Dam to the east of Icecrown Glacier, the Door of Death Mordressa, and the Door of Desolation to the north Ordrisa. The only thing that could truly obstruct the Alliance army's attack was the Door of Fear, Kalisa, in front of Icecrown Fortress. Of course, they still could not let their guard down, because behind the Door of Fear, there were still the Dark Cathedral, and Malakaris, Evil Castle, the two bases of the Calamity Army guarding Icecrown Fortress. Chapter 1672. Even so, Duque was still very satisfied. Looking at the image of the Gate of Fear through the magic eye, Duque's mouth curved into a thick smile. Smashing one door is always more convenient than smashing 3 doors. The betrayal of the Black Edge Knights confirmed the famous saying, "The strongest fortress is always breached from the inside." With the Shadow Vault as a base point, Duque unscrupulously teleported over and smashed the Scourge Army's Wizard Tower. The blizzard that surrounded the entire Icecrown Glacier was not natural. It was a magic fulcrum that the former Lich King, Nazul, had specially set up on several important elemental veins of the Icecrown Glacier. Relying on the Wizard Tower on these fulcrum, Nazul's magic could pass through the entire Icecrown Glacier without any hindrance. The Black Edge Knights had killed the Lich in the Wizard Tower as soon as they betrayed the Lich. Duque had only gone over to clean up the mess. The entire Icecrown Glacier had a total of 7 fulcrum points, with the evil Malakaris Castle as the center, forming a hexagram. It did not mean that the hexagram would become a pentagram by itself if one of its corners was removed. That kind of unbalanced collapse was the most fatal. Duque estimated that as long as his magic network completed its invasion of the Shadow Vault and took root here, the power of the blizzard around the Icecrown Glacier would be reduced by at least 50%. The difference between the original cannonballs that could not fly in and the largest flying battleships could fly in was like heaven and earth. Because of this, Darien's surrender was very precious. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the Allied forces surrounded the Icecrown Glacier from all sides. The Black Edge Knights were in the northwest, the Crusader Trial Arena was in the northeast, the Dalajan army was in the southeast, and the Winter Lake Fortress where the Alkavon treasury was located was in the southwest. In January, Duque let Naxxramas launch a surprise attack and directly took down the Balagard Fortress in the west of the Icecrown Glacier. In the second half of this winter, the Scourge Army and the Allied forces were in a state of tug-of-war. Arthas, who was unwilling to give up, launched a dozen large-scale attacks of millions of bones and 3 large-scale attacks of 5 million bones. From the remains of small animals like wild rabbits to the gigantic mammoth zombies and bone dragons, it was simply overwhelming. The price the Allied forces paid for the attacks of 5 million bones was an average of 35,000 deaths per battle, as well as the destruction of more than 1,000 tanks and heavy artillery. This was after the coalition army had used a large number of modern cannons to resist the Calamity Army's Corpse C tactic. Otherwise, it would not be surprising if the casualties were doubled. The number of casualties made Duque and Sal look quite bad. Duque was worried because of the astronomical military expenditure. Sal was angry because of the loss of human life. It couldn't be helped. The Alliance army was developing towards diversity. The most basic close combat sword and shield soldiers were the fewest. With the addition of the Horde, when it came to infantry battles, the main force would definitely be the Orc infantry. The only thing that could comfort Sal was that the weapons provided by the Alliance were quite sophisticated. They were all steel weapons that had been blessed by the Holy Light. Their strength and tenacity were praiseworthy, much better than the ones produced by the tribe. Moreover, the Alliance promised that the Horde could take these weapons with them after this battle. Even the weapons used by the dead could be sent back to Kalimdor's relatives as relics. This kind of kindness won the unanimous praise of the Horde Expeditionary Army. It wasn't that there were no regrets. The remains of the dead couldn't be carried away. They had to be cremated on the spot, which conflicted with the traditional Orc shaman doctrine. But there was no other way. It wasn't safe to sprinkle holy water on the corpses. As long as the Lich's dark magic smashed over, when the power of darkness surpassed the light, the corpses would still come back to life. But at least they managed to withstand it. Throughout the winter, the Alliance's factories didn't stop working, maintaining a 3-shift state to produce arms and military supplies. At the most critical time, even Duque had to use the magic of the magic net to open fixed portals in order to transport the wounded to the rear, and transport the most scarce ammunition to the front lines. Time entered March 26th of the Dark Portal. The characteristics of Northrend as a polar continent, coupled with the high altitude of the Iceground Glacier Plateau, meant that there wouldn't be any spring flowers blooming here. Just the temperature went from a few degrees below zero to a few degrees below zero. This was spring. Without the cover of the winter snowstorm, Arthas finally restrained his arrogance. The Scourge army almost completely retreated, only staying in the Iceground Glacier area. In Naxxramas, in the Alliance meeting hosted by Duque, all the big shots either sent someone to attend or sent a magic message. The time to attack the Iceground Glacier has come, Duque declared at the beginning of the meeting. Why not wait until summer? Although it's spring now, the cold will still weaken the power of the Red Dragon Army's draconic breath. Duque said in a deep voice, "We can't wait anymore. Recently, I've detected many teleportation portals. Arthas must have sent a large number of low-level liches out, probably to collect corpses. If we wait too long, I'm afraid we'll be surrounded in Northrend. Even if we can hold on, it'll put a lot of pressure on the logistics. By June, we can either reduce the number of troops by 200,000, or the entire Northern Expedition Coalition army will starve and only be half full every day." In Northrend, after continuous replenishment, the Alliance and Horde had a total of 500,000 troops. With so many people eating, drinking, and the corresponding military supplies, if it weren't for Duque, the Super Internal Affairs officer with the System Elf, just the logistics deployment would probably make the 1,000-man logistics headquarters go crazy. After all, not counting the summary and judgment, there were already more than 3,000 logistics officers carrying out logistics work. And that didn't include the non-military logistics personnel. Fortunately, as early as the Battle of Mount Hyjal, the Alliance began to focus on training logistics personnel for cross-sea warfare. Only then did they barely have enough logistics officers. In fact, the merchant ships of the Marcus family, Kurtiras, and Alterac family, apart from the necessary regular trade ships, had all been called up to supply Northrend. But it was still not enough. "All right, let's fight." Tsar sighed. Losing 100,000 soldiers in one winter would be a huge blow to the horde that had just arrived at Kalimdor. Even with Draenor's beastmen, 100,000 young and strong beastman warriors was still not a small loss. It'd be good if there were more troops. At least the attack could be formed in batches, Magni muttered. Tsar suddenly thought of something. Yes, the horde's forsaken. Anastrian said they're willing to fight. Duque's eyes suddenly lit up. Chapter 1673. Not only Duque, but the eyes of the other Alliance bigwigs also lit up. The factors involved were complicated. Back then, the Forsaken led by Anastrian established a kingdom in Lordaeron, and almost established the Undercity, which left a deep psychological scar on the people and elves of Lordaeron. If it weren't for the fact that they couldn't spare their hands, perhaps the Alliance would have hunted them down long ago. There wouldn't have been a new Undercity in Winterspring, and they wouldn't have found a chance to join the tribe. On the other hand, the Undying's thugs were actually quite useful. The Undying, who didn't need food or supplies and didn't fear the cold, could be said to be the best cannon fodder. For example, the activity of the Black Blade Knights in the winter left a deep impression on the Alliance bigwigs. From a commander's point of view, sometimes they wished that their subordinates were all obedient and powerful Death Knights. On the other hand, the Alliance wouldn't feel the pinch no matter how many people died in the tribe. If Anastrian was really willing to allow the few Forsaken to join the battle, it would be a useful addition no matter what. In fact, Sal was also tempted by the Sun King's proposal. For a while, Sal almost thought that the Forsaken were going to betray the tribe. After urging him a few times, the Sun King was finally willing to send out 50,000 Forsaken. Sal had seen the quality of this batch of soldiers. Very few were beastmen, and they were basically the corpses of humans and elves. As for the source, Sal didn't care. Anyway, the Alliance didn't protest, so Sal pretended not to see it. This was also the mentality of digging up one's ancestral grave, and it didn't matter how many bones came. In the end, the 50,000 Forsaken went out to fight. In addition to the most elite high-grade alchemists and magic researchers, as well as some elites guarding Winterspring. It was no exaggeration to say that Anastrian pulled in all the old ones. In the northwest of the Crystalsong Forest, Duque saw the Sun King and couldn't help but tease him. "Yo, Anastrian, you're really willing. The Forsaken belong to the tribe, and we are all loyal to the Great Chief. Since it's the Great Chief's call, we will obey. Now that the tribe and the Alliance are allies, Sir Marcus won't order your subordinates to attack your allies, right?" Since it was a dead face, there was no expression to speak of. No one could read Anastrian's thoughts from his fiery eyes. "Ha! You sure know how to talk. Don't worry, the Alliance will never attack our allies. Not in the past, not now, and definitely not in the future." Of course, Duque dared to say this out loud. However, Duque changed the topic. "That's right, I always feel that you're a guy who won't get up early without benefits. Why are you willing to bet almost all of the Forgotten Ones?" In the face of Duque's questioning, the Sun King was not annoyed. In his deep and dark eye sockets, his fiery eyes moved to the right and looked at Darien. The Alliance can accept Death Knights, so why can't the Forsaken of the Horde accept their undead compatriots who are freed from the bondage of the Lich King? His words sounded quite reasonable. The Alliance leaders all had expressions on their faces. Although the Scourge army was the enemy of the world, the Forsaken could use war to sustain war if they operated well. Compared to Arthas's brutal double enslavement of the mind and soul, the freedom of the Forsaken was, of course, more attractive to the undead freed from slavery. Perhaps if the boss of the Black Blade Knights was not Darien Mograine, but a former Horde Orc chief, perhaps the Black Blade Knights, which had thousands of high-level Death Knights, would have been taken advantage of by the Horde. Duque, and only Duque, looked at Anastrian with eyes full of ridicule. This kind of look that seemed to see through everything made the Sun King very uncomfortable. He said in a bureaucratic tone, "Your Excellency Supreme Commander Marcus, the Forsaken army is preparing to attack. Do you have any additional instructions?" Duque smiled. "No. I'm eager to see the active figures of the Forsaken on the battlefield." "You'll see it." With that, the Sun King turned around and left. At 9 o'clock in the morning on March 15th, year 26 of the Dark Portal, the Allied forces formed by the Alliance, the Horde, and the Sleeping Dragon launched an attack on the Icecrown Glacier from 6 directions at the same time. The first to fire the cannon was the Balagard Fortress on the high mountain to the west of the Icecrown Glacier. After the Alliance captured this place, they used the mobility of the floating fortress, their overwhelming military strength, and their advantage in top-level combat power to take down the Kurgala Fortress, which was further east. Then they used half of the winter to strengthen the 2 fortresses and the fortress, installing more than 500 modern cannons on them, the smallest of which had a diameter of 203 millimeters. At 9 o'clock, Together with a total of 2,000 cannons on Naxxramas, they poured artillery shells on the Gate of Fear, Kalisa, in the east, and the Dark Cathedral in the southeast. In just 3 hours, more than 50,000 artillery shells of various sizes were fired. Although they were unable to destroy the fortress-level ice shield, as well as the Gate of Fear, which was a full 30 meters thick and 100 meters tall, they successfully flattened most of the Dark Cathedral, which nurtured dark wizards. The huge dome was directly blown up. The Wintergrasp Lake Fortress in the southwest was quiet. The Alliance would not attack from this side. After all, although the Iceground Fortress was to the northeast of Wintergrasp Lake. Only an idiot would choose to attack a fortress on a high mountain that was more than 1,000 meters higher than Wintergrasp Lake from a place with an elevation of 70 degrees. The real battle was on the southeastern side of the Crystal Song Forest. The first to attack was the Dalajan. The Dalajan, personally led by Kale, did not directly take the brunt of the Scourge Army's anti-air artillery. After all, the Dalajan was first the capital of an Alliance kingdom, then a holy land of magic, and finally a fortress. It was completely different from a floating fortress like Naxxramas, which specialized in flying around the world to cause trouble. The Dalajan's mage tower was enough to make the mages' hearts ache for a long time if any one of them was destroyed. Therefore, the Dalajan's role this time was to support. It flew to an altitude of 3,000 meters, and then poured mud down. Yes, it was filling up the river. The Iceground Glacier's defense line was at the most gentle mountain pass, which happened to be the source of the River of Weakness. Tens of thousands of tons of mud were poured down, and in just an hour, the source of the River of Weakness was completely filled up. Almost at the same time that the river was filled up, the Dalajan began to descend and pour magic cannons at the Iron Wall Dam, which guarded the mountain pass. Chapter 1674. Times were changing, technology was developing, and the development of magic continued. Compared to the Dalajan that had suffered heavy losses during the battle with Naxxramas. Now, the Dalajan was on a path of no return in the direction of the magic stronghold. It still looked like those purple domes and towering spires. In reality, the magic circuit structure inside was completely different. Kale, knew that his position as the chairman of the Kirin Tor was only in name. In reality, the entire Dalajan was still under Duque's absolute control. Apart from that, the runes and mana transmission channels of every wizard tower in the Dalajan were all connected to Duque's weave. In a sense, the Dalajan was the core of the weave, just that it was at the same level as Karazhan. Duque was more willing to call it a double core. The Dalajan was the most important chess piece to break the Lich King Arthas' elemental monopoly in the Iceground Glacier. Its approach caused the hexagram magic formation, which had become incomplete due to the betrayal of the Black Edge Knights, to become even more fragmented. The sky was no longer filled with bone-chilling winds and fluttering white snowflakes. The entire sky was now occupied by the purplish blue of arcane energy. From time to time, zigzagging lightning flashed. In the void, the layers of clouds and various elemental turbulence were mixed together, boiling like porridge. In the sky above the Dalajan, a small vortex appeared on the left, center, and right. In just a few minutes, it was like a rock hitting water, creating ripples in the air that spread outwards. In the end, it formed 3 huge circles of red, white, and purple. Every circle was more than a kilometer in diameter. Anyone with the slightest elemental sensitivity would know that this was the largest elemental passage in history that the Dalajan, the core of the weave, had opened. It corresponded to the fire, water, and wind elemental realms. More black dots flickered in the storm caused by the elemental turbulence, like black sesame seeds dotting the sky. Every time the blue and white radiance flashed, a morning star wizard dressed in magic robes would be left standing on a 10-meter square conical floating stone. If one were to observe carefully, they would discover that the floating stone that every mage was standing on was actually a node of a magic array that was half hidden and frozen in midair. These magi, who were at least at the morning star rank, spread out in the 2-kilometer-wide sky. In ancient times when magic civilization was not so developed, mortals would be more willing to call these mages oracles, right? Duque's promotion of the weave didn't bring more top-ranked wizards to the Alliance. But the number of mid-ranked and low-ranked wizards in the alliance grew exponentially. These 10,000 sky mages were the best proof. Although they all had various drawbacks of rapid growth, their combat strength was real. On the Calamity Army's side, every Undying looked up at the sky. There was a moment of silence on the battlefield. The 12 huge flying warships were like 12 pages of a book. They circled around the Dalajan and slowly turned to face the dam. The muzzles of the magic cannons that stretched out from the opened cannons shone brightly under the elemental radiance. Those with sharp eyes would notice that the insignia of Duke's Storm was engraved on the barrel of each cannon. When the 12 magical warships, which were built using the same principles as the floating city, turned around one by one and aimed at the dam with one side of the ship's side, the giants guarding the dam keenly felt a great danger looming over them. There was no sound in the sky, only the sounds of nature. All the commands were transmitted and communicated in the domain of magic. Magic warships in position. Open the cannons. In the next moment, the 12 warships shook violently. One side of their hull suddenly shot out a rainbow light that wasn't fire. It was the radiance of high-purity fire elemental energy. Roar. Before the Alliance soldiers could react, the 6-story-tall giant standing on the defensive line of the dam let out a deafening roar. A bright explosion suddenly spread across the entire defensive line of the dam. This was just the appetizer. When the magic warships poured all their firepower on the giant undead creatures, the new generation of more advanced magic-infused cannons that were directly connected to the magic net began to display their power. If the traditional magic cannons only turned the giant undead creatures into human-shaped torches, it would take a while to burn their bodies and souls to ashes. But the new magic-infused cannons could not only destroy the undead creatures, but they could also directly threaten the fortress that had been strengthened by magic runes. When the Dalajan fired all the magic cannons toward the northwest, even Arthas, who was watching the battle from the ice throne in the distant ice-crowned fortress, raised his head subconsciously and faced the direction of the Dalajan. It was simple. In that instant, even he, the Lich King, felt threatened. Rumble. There was an earth-shattering explosion. Immediately, when the cannons stopped firing, the members of the Silver Hand Knights, led by Theon, quickly rushed to the giants of flesh and blood who had not yet fallen under the cannons. More than 100 holy knights raised their weapons at the same time, descending from the sky in a horse-slashing stance and swinging their weapons at the monsters. More than 100 streaks of holy aura extended from the flame-shaped weapons in their hands, piercing through the monsters whose life force had fallen to its lowest point in an instant. Many undead creatures were directly blown up. At the southern end of the plains that were once filled by the River of Weakness, Anastrian, the Sun King, silently watched the collapsing defensive line of the Scourge. If it had been 20 years earlier, this terrifying defensive line would not have been shaken at all. But now the huge dam was collapsing, and fragments the size of houses were falling down. All the undead creatures except the undead creatures below were flattened. The skeleton archers with bows and arrows, as well as the liches with magic staffs, who were neatly lined up on the dam, were all flattened. If it were not for the fact that there was a steady stream of Scourge soldiers pouring out of the secret passage behind the dam, the Sun King would have even thought that the defensive line had been completely destroyed, and that the Forsaken under him would not be able to do anything. The Sun King raised his golden magic staff with a phoenix head high, and the deep voice of the soul spread throughout the spirit sea of all the Forsaken. For eternal death. With that, the army of undead creatures surged toward the higher mountain pass of the ice-ground glacier. It was like water flowing backwards, giving people a discordant and dazed feeling. Chapter 1675. The Forsaken were not simple skeletons or zombies. Their independence was partly due to the fact that the Lich King, Nazul, had relaxed his mind control. On the other hand, it was also because they had the strongest mind and willpower among their kind. With willpower, it was always easy for one to stand out from the crowd. After experiencing the betrayal of the Calamity Army, the chaotic battle with the Alliance in Lordaeron City, and surviving in the dangerous Winterspring, the main force of the Forsaken was now quite elite. Kael Vats, who was sitting in the tallest mage tower in Dalajan City, looked coldly at the army of the Forsaken through the magic mirror. Kale, that's muttered to himself. More than 30,000 professionals? Over there were his former compatriots, as well as his deceased father. That figure, which was like a blazing sun, gave Kale, that's the illusion of yesterday. He was still the crown prince of Kuel Salis, and his father was still the Sun King, who was revered by the people. Unfortunately, that figure had become extremely unfamiliar, skinny, and full of an ominous aura. From the beginning he could not understand his father's thoughts, and now, he could not understand even more. At this moment, as if sensing Kale, that's spying, Anastrian turned his head. He raised his dry face, which still retained the familiar outline, and grinned at Kale that was originally sitting on the Kirin Tor chairman's throne, holding his head. At this moment he suddenly stood up, and his face turned ashen. Is he mocking me? The silent grin only lasted for a short while. The Sun King did not continue to look at the floating castle in the sky. He turned around and began to move forward under the escort of a few high-level liches. Tens of thousands of Forsaken warriors waved the sharp blades provided by the Alliance, wore brand new armor, and rushed toward the ruins of the dam. They were like marching ants, devouring all the Calamity warriors who attempted to resist along the way. They looked exactly the same, but they easily disassembled their compatriots into parts. The huge abominations belonging to the Forsaken waved heavy axes or meat cleavers, hacking at the struggling giants of flesh and blood. The entire hillside was filled with a rotten stench. This was like a battlefield that no one had cleaned up. It was like a breeding ground for plague. In the sky, Kale that squinted his eyes. This was why the Alliance would never send troops to fight alongside the Forsaken. Just the stench alone was enough to reduce the combat power of the Alliance warriors by 30%. Therefore, the Alliance used the cooperation of all the air forces along the way. As long as the Calamity army dared to launch an attack, the Dalajan would be responsible for intercepting and destroying them. Northwest, the Ebon Edge Knights of Shadow Vault were ready to depart. 5,000 Death Knights rode their skeletal war horses silently, and stood on the plateau. They allowed the Alliance artillery unit behind them to pour shells into the canyon below the mountain. The Black Edge Knights would not attack now. They would only launch a pincer attack from the west when the Alliance army attacked the desolate door, Aldusa. The only variable was in the northeast. What? William exclaimed in shock. You're saying that Uncle Duque ordered us to stop attacking and let Odor's mechanical gnome army take the lead? The one who appeared in front of William was Vanessa. She directly showed the order with Duque's seal. Damn it, we've been training in the arena for the whole winter, from field battles to siege battles. Our brothers are all rubbing their palms. We've been waiting for this day. Why did they suddenly stop? We're the vanguard. Valilla, one of the epic hero thieves in William's team, screamed. Regarding who was the number one thief in the Alliance, Valilla had always believed that if they had the same equipment, she would definitely be able to defeat Vanessa. Unfortunately, equipment was also a part of one's strength. In a situation where the difference in strength was not more than one level, she would always be defeated if her equipment was not good enough. Seeing that Vanessa had stopped the army's attack, Valilla was rather displeased. On the contrary, Druid Brawl Bearmantle was the most mature and steady. Among the three of them, he often played the role of stabilizing the situation. William and Valilla were both the kind of characters who seemed calm, but would roar fiercely once they started fighting. Only he was pulling the reins of the two of them, preventing them from courting death. Therefore he grabbed Valilla's arm. Uncle Duque, do you have any other commands? William asked calmly. Be careful of the tribe's siege weapons. Vanessa said seriously. We've found out that the Forsaken are carrying an unknown plague weapon. It's stored in a jar in liquid form and launched as a throwing weapon. I personally stole a little bit of it, and after Master Marcus' urgent research, I discovered that not only can it destroy the undying, but it also has a terrifying lethality to the living. After hearing Vanessa's words, William and the other two felt terrible. Items that could be used to destroy evil, such as holy water that was filled with divine power, were the most useful. Countless battles had proven that such single-use items were definitely the Calamity Army's nemesis. Moreover, holy water was not harmful to the human body, but beneficial instead. Its effects in exorcising evil and promoting the healing of wounds were rather significant. The alliance had also provided the tribe with a large amount of holy water and standard holy light weapons. Why would the tribe not use such good and absolutely safe weapons and instead ship plague weapons? What was the meaning of this? Why don't you stop them? Or prohibit them from approaching the battlefield? William's tone was already a little stern. They have submitted an official report to the alliance, saying that they want to test new weapons. William fell silent. The alliance and the tribe were, after all, temporary allies. Both parties did not have a subordinate relationship. The alliance could test new weapons in battle, and so could the tribe. They had made a report and warned them in advance. No matter how uneasy they were, they could only take precautions themselves and could not control the others. William almost gritted his teeth as he said, "Adjutant, inform the troops to stop advancing and change to a state of alert. Also, please inform His Excellency Varrock Salyafar to come over." Valilla asked, "Do we really have to be so careful?" Brawl said, "Didn't you see that Commander Marcus specially sent someone to inform us? He didn't even use magic to send a message." To put it bluntly, magic transmission was just a variant application of magical energy transmission. Since it was magic, there was a possibility that it could be broken. Sun King Anastrian was one of the few master magicians in the world. No one knew exactly how powerful he was. Perhaps the one who had the highest chance of becoming a demigod after Duque was not Kaisi, but him. Chapter 1676. Salyafar, who had been summoned, was quite surprised by William's announcement. What happened? Why is everyone ready but not attacking? Didn't you hear the cannons from the other side of the mountain? Salyafar pointed to the far west. It was the sound of cannons coming from the shadow vault to the west of the Door of Desolation. William never liked to lie. Others could say that he was irritable or even bloodthirsty, but no one would say that he was a liar. He shook his head. "I received a direct order from the Alliance's Supreme Commander, Lord Duke Marcus. The Alliance's Northeast Front Army will temporarily postpone their attack. Ulder's Steel Army will attack first." Is there any new information that our tribe needs to know? Varrock was more experienced. He could sense that William knew something but refused to say it. William shook his head. "No comment. Whether to attack according to the plan is up to you, Sir Salyafar. You can also ask Chief Sar before making a decision. Ulder's army will attack on time anyway." On the surface, it seemed that the Alliance was messing around by changing the order of attack without permission. The problem was that the four allied armies were not unified, and they were all marching through consultation. At this moment, the Alliance had launched an attack from at least 3 directions. It could not be said that the Alliance was neglecting military strategy. Varrock's expression was very bad. "I will ask Chief Sar." Varrock did not say much and turned to leave. After he returned to the tribe's encampment, he connected a magic message to Orgrimmar. Sar was also worried. "What is Duque doing? This is not the Duke Marcus I know," Wajin reminded. "Is the Alliance conserving their forces? In the past few years, the Alliance's army has become less and less fond of close combat." Sar shook his head and said with certainty, "No. Duque is a wise and decisive person. When it is time to fight, he will never be stingy with his sacrifice. He cares more about the covenant between the Horde and the Alliance than I do. He has never done anything that goes against the Alliance. The only explanation for him doing this now is that he knows something, but can't tell me because of the situation." "Why don't we ask him directly?" Wajin suggested. Sar seemed to be talking to himself. "No. It's useless to ask. The reason he informed us through William is that he doesn't want to talk to me directly. According to my deduction, it must be our tribe's problem." Wajin asked, "What is the first stage of the original plan?" Varrock said, "Attack from multiple directions. However, the terrain is unfavorable in the west, so the main attack is long range. The southeast and northeast are the main attack. After the Forsaken troops in the southeast broke through the defense line of the Iron Wall Dam, they turned to attack the city of Calamity on the eastern highlands of the Iceground Glacier. In the northeast, Otter's steel army would block any troops that might come from Desolation Gate and Death's Gate. My army will go from the north to the south, and King Rin's army will go from the east to the west through the Ladrasil Trail. We'll attack the City of Calamity from 3 directions. It was a 3 attack. If the Alliance suddenly stops, won't they be sending the Forsaken Ones to die? What if? Wajin suddenly thought of something, but when he saw Sal's face and thought of Sal's efforts to unite the tribes, he suddenly became discouraged. Forget it, it's nothing. Sal was confused, but he didn't think too much about the big picture. I'm going to find Duque. Varrock, your people will continue to attack Scourge from the north. The Horde will not abandon its allies. We can't let the Anastrian people face the Scourge army alone. Understood. Varrock punched his chest. In order to catch up, Varrock had even allowed his son Dranos to lead the elites of the Blackrock clan and set off first. Although the Blackrock orcs didn't like the cold weather, as a clan that used to live in the mountains, they were very good at climbing mountains. On the other side, Sal found Duke. Tell me, why did William's army stop marching in the northeast? We found that there was a mistake with a batch of artillery shells. The artillery shells, which are not suitable for use in the cold weather, were mistakenly shipped to the front line. If the Alliance troops launched an attack without the cover of heavy artillery, it would increase unnecessary casualties. I strongly suggest that you stop your army as well. Duque was an Azeroth Award winner, so he didn't even need to prepare a script to lie. Is it true? Sal asked. Duke shrugged with a look that said, you guess. The uneasiness in Sal's heart grew stronger. But no matter what he said, Duque wouldn't budge. At most, he promised to push the Dalajan forward and send as many airships as possible. Unfortunately, due to the allocation of troops, they couldn't send more battleships to besiege Scourge. A cloud of uneasiness hung over the entire alliance. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on March 15th, the Forsaken Army and Dranos' Orc army broke through the defense line of the Iron Wall Dam. They faced the majestic Scourge army in the south and north. The Scourge army was located in the eastern part of the Iceground Glacier. It was an important fulcrum for Arthas to rule the entire region. There was a huge magical ley line second only to the Iceground Fortress. Unlike Duque's previous life, perhaps because the Alliance had put too much pressure on the Lich King, Arthas used this ley line to create an extremely powerful magic circle. Since last winter, there had been a terrifying level 10 gale every day. An ice tornado that would never move was always circling around the City of Calamity. Looking at the majestic city in front of him, Anastrian glanced at the Dalajan city that had followed the Forsaken army to this airspace. The Sun King contacted Kale that's directly. President Kirin Tor, please immediately order the Dalajan's magic cannons to bombard the Scourge army and weaken its shield. Anastrian's address was very businesslike, and Kaizi couldn't find fault with it. Facing his dead father, Kaizi's feelings were extremely complicated. But after so many years of experience and being redeemed by Duque, Kale, Bats had already gotten over it. Your Excellency Anastrian Sunstrider, don't we need to wait for the main force of the Horde? No need. I'm a powerful undead. I can clearly sense that Arthas has already abandoned this place. The undead inside are not the main force of the Scourge army. Our current forces are enough. Since you say so as an ally, I have no objections. In 15 minutes, the Dalajan will launch an attack. Please judge the timing of the attack yourself, Your Excellency. The father and son, who had the same blood flowing in their veins, ended this exchange in a way that they were passers-by. Chapter 1677. Kael'Vat sighed softly. His face was a little gloomy. Your Highness. Great astrologer Carponia had never changed the way she addressed Kael. That's. Kaizi waved his hand. There's nothing between me and the late king. We're separated by life and death, and our standpoints are different. There's nothing to talk about. The words late king made Kael'Vat stand clear. No one in the Kirin Tor parliament would say anything. Carponia bowed her head and retreated. Kael'Vat also did not think that the Scourge army would defend the City of Calamity. First of all, the Scourge army would never treat any member of the army as an indispensable existence, except for the Lich King himself. The Lich King, who had no compassion, would only treat soldiers as expendable. The meaning of their existence was to kill the living and bring more scourge soldiers. Secondly, it was the geographical location. If the Alliance was a traditional army, then the City of Calamity, which stood on a high mountain, would indeed be an important fulcrum. However, when the Alliance had a powerful air force and broke through the storm protection around the entire ice-crowned glacier, the City of Calamity would just be a slightly more dangerous castle. Moreover, the City of Calamity was too far away from the ice-crowned fortress. At the very least, they were separated by the Door of Death, Mordressa, and the evil castle, Maricaris. With the ice-crowned glacier being attacked from all sides, only Maricaris, which was in a triangular position with the ice-crowned fortress, should be heavily guarded by the Scourge army. In other words, the City of Calamity was destined to be abandoned. The only difference was how many soldiers it could replace in the Alliance. Confirm the status of the magic network. Prepare to charge the elements. Other than the main cannon, charge all mage towers. Listen to my command. Kale, that sat on the throne and gave a series of orders to the Dalajan. Soon, above the floating Dalajan, which was gradually approaching the City of Calamity, every mage tower lit up. The colorful elements made these mage towers of different heights look like they were celebrating a festival, filled with neon lights. Looking at the energy infusion meter of the dozens of mage towers in front of them, when all the columns showed more than 90%, Kale, that's waved his raised right hand. Fire. Carbonia's crisp voice was transmitted to the masters of each mage tower through magic. In the next second, the dazzling elements around the mage tower were rapidly compressed by the large magic array solidified by the mage tower itself. They turned into beams of bright light that easily crossed the 3,000 meters distance and blasted into the huge tornado that was spinning around the City of Calamity. The nature of the ice tornado was a combination of the ice and wind elements. When there were enough other elements to destroy the elemental laws and stable state here, the form of magic would also collapse. In the eyes of all the allied army soldiers, the originally slender ice tornado became thick and fat, like a Coke bottle becoming a Coke can, and then a twisted Coke can. Kale that's watched everything quietly with his sharp gaze. In his eyes that were filled with elements, he saw another mirror image. It was a diagram of the turbulent flow of elements. What mortals saw were fireworks, but as a breaking dawn archmage who had a high chance of becoming a demigod, what he saw was the balance of the elements. When the continuous magic cannon bombardment reached 36 seconds, Kale that spat out a word, "Stop." Seeing her master nod slightly, Carbonia gave the order, "Begin the second stage." The so-called second stage seemed to be worthless, because it was using the Dalajan anti-gravity system to suck up tens of thousands of tons of sand and stones, and then using something similar to a wind cannon. It shot the sand and stones at the City of Calamity. Of course, these so-called wind cannons were all magically driven. At first, the huge tornado could still continue to spin at high speed with the sand and stones it sucked in. As it spun, even the ordinary soldiers could tell that this tornado could not be used anymore. It became slower and slower, and more condensed. In less than a minute, the tornado that had been circling around the City of Calamity, as if it would never stop, finally came to an end. Without the sharp whistling sound, without the terrifying barrier that could easily blow away tanks, the City of Calamity was nothing more than a dish. Aha! Good job. On the snowy hillside in the north, the orcs led by Dranos raised their weapons and shouted wildly. In the west and south, the densely packed Forsaken warriors remained silent. The Sun King looked into the distance and suddenly found that the east side of the City of Calamity was covered in flying snow. Oh, the Alliance is still here. As long as one had telescopic magic or binoculars, it was not difficult to see the light tanks with the Alliance insignia through the flying snow. Perhaps it was because the mountain roads were narrow, and heavy tanks could not move easily. The light tanks that came were all less than 20 tons. This was not important. The insignia and flags of the tank troops were telling the tribe that this was the tank troops directly under Bulang Bronzebeard. Humph. I said they wouldn't come, but they still came. Dranos curled his lips, and then saw a signal flare rising above the Forsaken army. Attack! Hey, when the Alliance's tanks charge first, we'll follow. The alliance obviously came in a hurry, and they did not even bring infantry. In the past, the alliance always liked to coordinate operations with multiple units. Perhaps it was because there were already Orc and Forsaken infantry at the scene, and there was a Dalajan overhead to cover them. This time they directly drove the tank troops over. Boom! The familiar sound of cannons was still so deafening. It was a pity that they were all light tanks, and the largest barrel diameter was no more than 60 millimeters. They did not even have the latest 88 millimeters cannon, which felt like their firepower was a little lacking. As soon as the battle began, Dranos found that it did not matter. The Calamity army was famous for destroying without building. This city of Calamity had not been properly managed. The origin of the city of Calamity could no longer be investigated. The only thing that was certain was that it was an old-fashioned castle, built using traditional techniques, using tree trunks as stakes and constantly ramming earth. It could not be compared to the reinforced concrete walls of the Alliance. Originally, the extremely cold climate of Northrend had covered every brick on this castle with a thick layer of ice, which was a very good defensive bonus. Unfortunately, the continuous bombardment of the Dalajan, especially the fire elemental attacks, had melted a lot of the ice on the wall. There was no need for armor-piercing shells, just high-explosive shells could blast a big hole in the wall. A volley of cannons, concentrated at the foot of the wall, directly blasted a big hole. The city wall's own weight easily crushed the city wall itself. In just a few blinks of an eye, more than 10 huge gaps at least 10 meters wide had appeared on the city wall. That's enough. Let's go. Chapter 1678. After working with the Alliance for a long time, Little Salyafar had also developed the ability to coordinate artillery, mechanized armor, and scattered soldiers. Seeing that the Alliance's tanks were the first to charge forward with their tanks, the Beastmen did not fall behind. They ran at full speed, perfectly matching the rhythm of the attack, and broke into the city from the east. In the south of the city, because the Dalajan had spat out a large amount of sand and gravel, the tornado wall could not carry any more sand and gravel away. Most of the sand and gravel fell to the west and south. This formed a natural siege slope. There was no need for siege ladders or anything like that. The Forsaken could just rush up the slope and reach the city wall. For eternal death. Anastrian pointed with his finger, and the Forsaken under his command immediately began to charge, as if they were going to break the river with a flick of their whip. The process of taking over the city of Calamity was a little boring. Just as the Sun King had predicted, the Undying inside were not the main force. Although there were many of them, most of them were low-level undead such as skeleton soldiers and zombies. Not to mention the Liches and Death Knights that were the core of the Calamity army. Even high-level banshees and abominations were rarely seen. Delano split a large skeletal warrior in half with his axe, then stomped on it with his thick metal boots. The skull of the skeletal warrior disintegrated into a pile of white debris on the spot. Just like Father said, the Doomsday army is likely to give up on the Calamity City, huh? However, the resistance in the city of Calamity was still quite fierce. There were no high-level undead soldiers, but almost every building in the city that was slightly taller had been modified into a spirit tower. These defensive magic buildings that were full of the cursing sex style were quite annoying. Above the spirit tower was a spirit crystal that was suspended in the air. As long as it was a disciple of the lowest level of the cursing sect, they would be able to control the soul crystal to attack any living beings within a 200-meter radius. This kind of attack on the soul level could not be defended by conventional means. The power of vengeful spirits could easily penetrate any armor in the world and directly hit one's soul. Many of the places where the spirit towers were set up were quite dangerous, and most of them were surrounded by multiple buildings. From afar, one could not even see them, much less use artillery fire. Without the Alliance's paladins, the Horde could only rely on human lives to fill the gap. Using the charging soldiers to draw away the Spectre Tower's firepower, and relying on the Spectre Tower's low attack frequency, they immediately called for the Alliance's tanks to charge over and fire at close range, forcibly destroying the Spectre Tower. Watching his compatriots fall one by one, Delano felt as though his flesh was being cut off. The only fortunate thing was that this was not the end for the orc warriors. Before the war, Thrall had reached an agreement with the Nastrian. If the orcs died on the battlefield, Thrall would allow the Forsaken to resurrect them, and let them continue to fight as warriors of the Horde. However, they would be included in the ranks of the Forsaken. In a war, soldiers were expendable. If the same life could be used up twice, then, at the very least, it could reduce the casualties of the living. This was a type of bitterness, a type of helplessness. 3 hours later, just as the Allied forces were about to completely occupy the city of Calamity, news of the appearance of Arthas and Malygos suddenly came from the west and northwest. In the command post of Naxxramas, Magni yelled, "Direct attack!" Hoo 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 hoo. The wind was howling, accompanied by a terrifying white beam that traversed the sky. Naxxramas, the flying fortress, shook violently. That was not a terrifying impact that could shake the earth and mountains. If it was a simple energy cannon attack, it might not have been so terrifying. What was truly terrifying was that this was a rare dual elemental attack. The deep and evil shadow element, and the bone-chilling ice element. Although these two types of energy did not conflict with each other, but they were not related. They were perfectly blended together to form an unparalleled and terrifying attack. At this time, Jaina was in charge of the fortress's magic defense. As one of the Alliance's 3 existing magic powerhouses, Jaina's strength could not be said to be weak. The moment the magic mirror captured Arthas's figure, Jaina turned on the fortress's magic shield to the maximum. Naxxramas was no longer the fortress it had been under the control of the Calamity army. After falling into the hands of the Alliance, it had been expanded, reinforced and strengthened many times. The latest strengthening was after Duque became a demigod, and a new layer of magic protection array was added to the surface of Naxxramas. Originally, after Duque obtained the Titan rune magic inheritance from Malygos, he had planned to strengthen it again. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, he did not have the time to do this. Even so, Naxxramas's magic protection ability was still quite terrifying. Even such a Naxxramas could not withstand this attack. Using the energy of thousands of wronged souls, Frostmourn's fury was ignited. This well-prepared attack easily pierced through Naxxramas's shield. Jaina did not even have time to use the elements of the magic net before the 3 layers of shield collapsed in front of her. With a terrifying roar, the east side of the fortress at a 45-degree angle with the ground, an area the size of 3 football fields, was penetrated. It entered from below and exited from above. If it wasn't for Magni controlling the fortress to the side at the last moment, it might have hit the command post directly. Contact was instantly lost in the 5 districts. There were more than 1,000 Alliance soldiers there. This was not all of the casualties. As the terrifying soul power spread, with the penetrated area as the center, at least 4,000 people in the 32 large spaces around it fell silently. They were all directly hit by the soul attack, and the souls in their bodies were directly annihilated. They died just like that. They did not even have the chance to become immortals before they became corpses. This was not the end. In the further areas, countless soldiers suffered a mental shock equivalent to Banshee's wail. The degree of damage depended on how far away they were from the damaged area and how strong their souls were. It was no exaggeration to say that this attack alone caused at least 30,000 casualties in Naxxramas. 1/3 of the entire fortress functions were paralyzed. The damage caused by the dual attributes of frost and shadow wasn't over yet. With the breach in the fortress as the center, extreme cold was spreading rapidly. A huge ice lump was forming. It was as if it had a life of its own, sucking in frost elements from all directions. It became bigger and heavier. In less than 10 seconds, everyone in the fortress felt that the fortress was tilting due to the sudden additional weight. Looking at the magnified image of the Lich King Arthas standing on the broken dome of the Dark Cathedral, leaning on his sword and wearing a full set of heavy armor, everyone in the command post sucked in a cold breath. Chapter 1679. The strength of demigods is indeed very different. With this level of destructive power, if you say Arthas is a true god, I'd King believe it. Magni cursed, turned his head, and directly activated the highest level of magic transmission. Duque. The idiot you were talking about is here. If you don't come over, you'll be collecting my corpse. Almost as soon as Magni shouted for help, the surroundings changed. Arthas, don't be too arrogant. With a loud sound, two huge slender figures jumped out of the void around Naxxramas, taking huge steps, stepping on the air, and pouncing straight at Arthas. The Karaj twin emperors, very standard demigod powerhouses. Their huge bodies could be seen clearly from far away. Go. Insect Emperor. Kill Arthas. On the cannons of Naxxramas, on the flying battleships around, every Alliance soldier who saw the big boss powerhouses attack cheered. If it was the Karaj twin emperors of the past, of course they wouldn't be able to fly. After being killed by Duque, their souls melted into the magic net and became elemental creatures, so it was too easy for them to fly. The two emperors, whose minds and lives were connected, charged straight at a terrifying speed. The Sword Emperor took the lead, the Karaj Emperor sword slashing down heavily with the momentum of Mount Tai. The Demon Emperor waved his staff, and two magic, one left and one right, made two wonderful arcs, just brushing past the left and right sides of the Sword Emperor's body. If there were no accidents, the three attacks would land on Arthas at the same time. What a Lich King! As the representative of the villain's attractiveness, as a top-level existence among demigods, Arthas used his strength to prove that he wasn't a pushover. Facing the simultaneous attacks, he didn't retreat, but advanced. With a tap of his foot, an ice mountain rose up from beneath him. No, this was no longer the concept of rising. The huge ice flower exploded under Arthas's feet, and the violent recoil sent his whole body shooting into the sky like an arrow from a bow. With a speed even faster than the Sword Emperor, Arthas charged towards the Sword Emperor. The Sword Emperor's eyes suddenly widened. In his field of vision, the black-armored, white-haired figure was rapidly growing larger at a speed faster than he could react to. Ah! Among all the martial arts in the world, only speed was unbeatable. In front of Arthas's absolute speed, the Sword Emperor felt as if his movements were as slow as a snail. Before he could make the slightest change of direction, a bright black ray of light had already passed through his slightly narrow abdomen. A wave of pain that they hadn't felt for a long time was transmitted to the souls of the two brothers. They had long since abandoned their physical bodies. Injuries to their physical bodies would not bring them pain, but the pain in their souls would make them feel even more tormented. It wasn't over yet. Taking advantage of the moment, she slashed at the Sword Emperor. The smaller Arthas rushed past the Sword Emperor's waist. She tapped the back of the Sword Emperor's waist with the tip of her foot, and her entire body accelerated once again. It was as if she had turned into a black cannonball, heading straight for the Demon Emperor. Humph! Come! The Nephilim King unleashed a large flame blast. The condensed high-purity fire elemental ball exploded like a small blooming sun. Arthas didn't dodge. Her entire body was surrounded by an extremely cold aura. She completely broke through the surface with a single point. She gathered the frost elemental around her, and rushed over in one breath. This scene could be described in one sentence. Vek Lore wanted to kill Second Fool with an egg. Second Fool didn't want to talk to Vek Lore, so he used a stone to burst Vek Lore's egg. The Lich King's high strength and mystery easily destroyed the Demon Emperor's low concentration of elemental energy. Facing the aggressive Arthas, the Demon Emperor still wanted to rely on his physical immunity to take a blow from Frostmourne. Arthas seemed to have seen through the Demon Emperor's thoughts. He didn't even use his sword and directly stretched out his empty left hand. The seemingly small palm suddenly pressed on the Demon Emperor's forehead. From under the Lich King's heavy black full-cover helmet, only these two words popped out. Ice Seal. Just for a moment. The Karaj twin emperors, whose strength had undoubtedly stepped into the demigod realm, burst out a ball of light representing annihilation at the same time. It was like the last second of a candle's candlelight. After bursting out, there was no more sound, and it completely dissipated in midair. The Alliance soldiers who witnessed this scene were all stunned. No one thought that the two demigods belonging to the Alliance would be so easily knocked down in 2 moves. The ferocity of the Lich King was deeply imprinted in their minds at this moment. Is Arthas really that strong? In the next second, the fear of the Alliance soldiers was immediately calmed. It was very simple. because a powerful existence riding a black dragon appeared in the sky above Naxxramas. He was, of course, the supreme commander of the alliance, Duke Marcus, and his mount, the Earth Guardian dragon Onyxia. Ha! Earthies, you really surprised me. How dare you run out of your white turtle shell? Duque looked down at Earthies condescendingly, and his contemptuous voice spread throughout the airspace through the elemental vibration of the magic net. Every Alliance soldier couldn't help but let out the loudest cheers after hearing Duque's voice. Long live the Alliance! Long live His Excellency Duke Marcus! Our commander is the strongest! That's right, in the hearts of the Alliance people, only Duque was the ultimate strong. The failure of the Karaji twin emperors was certainly a setback. But as long as Duque did not fall, the Alliance people would have a firm belief in their hearts. Brilliant victories again and again, great achievements that were enough to be sung through the ages, forged this confidence that would not be easily destroyed and obliterated. The morale that had just fallen slightly immediately rose again. Earthies seemed to be disgusted with the recovery of the Alliance people's morale, and said coldly, "Sure enough, if you hit your dogs, they will run out." Unfortunately, if those two dogs just now were alive, they could be used to guard the door. Duque's facial muscles twitched, and his left eye narrowed slightly. It must be admitted that Earthies' attack was indeed effective. If the Karaji twin emperors were still the pair of bosses in the temple, it was estimated that they would have completely knelt by now, and even their souls would have been sucked into Frostmourne, and they would have completely become the slaves of the Lich King. However, since they were included in the magic net, their souls no longer belonged to them, and the core of their souls had long since become a part of the magic net. What Earthies had just knocked down was only a soul projection that had part of its soul, and was filled with a large number of elements. Being beheaded, of course, would be greatly damaged, but after resting for a while, they could still recover their strength and come out again. As for how long it would take, Duque was not sure. There was no doubt that Earthies took advantage of the gap when Duque did not personally come to the front line, and in the end, dealt a heavy blow to the Alliance camp. Chapter 1680. Many people nodded in agreement. The fight against evil was never a meaningless show of support by the majority, and leaving the battle to the few. This was the largest ghost tower in the city. At the same time, in the City of Calamity, Hodier, the Ice Guardian, could only watch from below, because aerial combat was not his domain. Duque immediately realized that he could not retreat. Maligos, who was flying in the air, only had half of his body left. Everything below his waist had been cut off, and now it seemed that it could not be reattached. The figure of Lich King Arthas suddenly appeared in the dark green crystal. "Oh, do you really think I don't dare to fight you here?" Duque was amused. "Haha, Arthas, it's better than you. It doesn't matter who you fight. As long as you hide under the bed and don't come out, no one can force you." In the trapezoidal room at the base of the ghost tower, the Sun King easily found the target of this trip. It was a huge soul crystal that needed 20 people to barely wrap their arms around, and it was a full 10 stories high. It was not only the ice elemental rushing over from the water elemental realm, but also a terrifying attack combined with the natural cold of no scent. The mountain collapsed. A round of arcane bombs made Calegos dizzy, and then it pounced on his back and bit him nonstop. Everyone could see it. Without a powerful powerhouse to help Calegos, there would probably be another demigod bone dragon under the Lich King. "You dare? Of course you dare. But can you do it?" Accompanied by Arthas' mocking voice, an earth-shattering roar erupted under his feet. Duque was not annoyed. After all, his loss was temporary. Once he retreated, Naxxramas behind him would become the direct target of this volcanic eruption. "Damn, everyone knows you're useless, but can't you, Calegos, give me a little more strength?" Arthas' blue eyes flickered in his helmet. Suddenly he smiled. "Very good. Not bad. Once I thought you were a despicable thief. Now I will at least recognize you as an opponent who can fight me. I will watch here and see if you and your coalition can afford the so-called price." A moment ago, his face was still a little ashen, but in the next second it softened. The coalition army's encirclement and suppression of the Calamity troop came to an end. driven by the enormous shadow magic array. The dark green crystal was constantly emitting a beam of chaotic green light into the sky. It didn't matter if it made sense or not. He immediately used mystery with a higher authority, forcefully using a sea of ice elemental essence to fight against Duque's weave. Every living being of Azeroth had the obligation to fight and pay the price, even if the price was their lives and souls. Why is Earthes behaving in such an abnormal manner? The Sun King didn't mind. He brought the 2 radiant moon liches and slowly floated into the largest specter tower. What a joke! Even if he only had 70% of his strength left, Kalecgos wouldn't even be able to escape, let alone fight back. How could Duque give up the floating fortress that they had worked so hard to snatch? When it was confirmed that there were no more Calamity warriors in the city, Delano and Anastrian met up in the center of the city. The dignified current magic guardian dragon was actually beaten like a dog by a lazy former dragon. Faced with Duque's mockery, Earthes was angry at first, but then his voice was filled with sarcasm. His lover, Matagorsa, wanted to help, but the difference in strength was too great. He was blasted down in an instant, and fell on the shadow arches with heavy injuries. What made the Alliance most depressed was that Kalecgos' army was defeated like a landslide. The problem was that Earthes was very abnormal. Obviously, he wanted to restrain them. There were corpses everywhere, some of them orcs, some of them forgotten ones, but most of them belonged to the Calamity troop. A shocking change occurred. But the Sun King was the first to speak. This is where the note of the magic ley line is. As long as we change the ley line here, the snowstorm surrounding the Iceground Glacier area will be further reduced. The Alliance can then bring in more flying warships. He gently placed his withered right-hand bone, which had already peeled off its flesh, on the green crystal. Just as Anastrian was about to chant a spell to change the magic ley line here. His soul had been seriously injured in that interception. If one were to really evaluate his strength, Maligos now only had 70% of his strength when he was alive at most. With that, Earthes actually didn't plan to continue fighting. He just leaned on his sword and stood on the ice above the Shadow Cathedral's dome, looking at Duque just like that. The Sun King explained to Delano, but this young and brave orc leader didn't care at all. His huge fangs twitched. That's your mage's business. The tribe's warriors have already completed their duty. At the same time, on the shadow arches in the northwest, the demigod Lich Maligos was torturing the new blue dragon King Kalecgos in the air. Hee, isn't it natural for the Undying to offer their souls and bodies for their king? But you, Duke Marcus, don't you think you've fallen into a trap? Leave the rest to us. Magni and the other Alliance soldiers were all sighing softly. King against king, general against general. This time Computer Lou left Duque slightly stunned. Duque immediately adjusted his state of mind. Fallen into a trap? Perhaps. But as long as I'm up against you, Earthes, there's nothing I can do even if other areas are broken through. I'm not a saint, nor am I an omniscient and omnipotent super true god. I can't save everyone in Azeroth, every living being. If I want the future of my descendants, every living being must pay the price. The white mountain peaks split apart with a loud bang, and then tens of thousands of tons of snowflakes splattered out from the snowy peak under Earthes' feet. He was so sudden and so close that even someone as powerful as Anastrian was caught off guard. You. Duque's words made the Alliance soldiers who heard this fall into deep thought. Having lost 2 legs and a large tail, Maligos' close combat abilities were reduced by more than half. Although he had become a Dracolic, his shadow magic power had been greatly strengthened, and his ice and arcane magic power had been greatly weakened. On the other hand, his fire magic power, which the undead creatures hated the most, was completely useless. Those who weren't at the demigod level were no match for him at all. Duque had already reached the pinnacle of being a commander, and the strongest. Then this method of bullying others forced Alexstrasza to rush over to save the day. Because Maligos had sealed off the surrounding space, the Red Dragon Queen could only fly over at full speed to the nearby airspace. Chapter 1681. Be careful, my king. Arthas. Wah! The screams in the spirit tower made Dranos and his subordinates, who were waiting outside, jump on the spot. Arthas? Isn't he confronting Marcus? Hearing the screams, young Salyafar was bewildered. The Alliance Army's intelligence exchange was quite good. Just as the battle stopped, they received news that Naxxramas had been severely damaged and Arthas had appeared. Since it was Duque fighting Arthas over there, how could there be another Arthas here? Could it be that a Nastrian was too afraid of Arthas and confused the leader of the enemy with a more powerful Death Knight? In the next moment, Dranos drove this damn thought out of his mind. The Sun King, who was famous in the entire tribe, had been rebuked. Although a fallen phoenix was not as good as a chicken, a Nastrian had once been rich. The lifestyle that was imprinted in the memories of the High Elves still dominated him, even after he became a lich. Even if he didn't say it, everyone knew that he looked down on the tribe's uncouth chiefs. For example, even though he was already a skeleton, every time he sat down, he would use magical elements to drive away the dust on his seat. If he could, the Sun King would never allow himself to be so embarrassed. At this moment, the Sun King was like a pitiful worm that had been hit by a rampaging rhinoceros. The surging and irresistible impact directly caused his back to smash through the walls of the spirit tower that had been strengthened by magic runes. Seeing the fragments of the tower wall that contained dark magic explode like petals blown away in a storm, one could imagine how terrifying the attack that the Sun King had endured was. If he was a living person, perhaps his entire internal organs would have been completely shattered by this blow. Fortunately, he was a lich. However, it was also because he was a lich that he could counterattack in ways that ordinary people could not. Although his chest had been pierced by Arthas' left hand, he could still maintain his spellcasting state. An instant cast, Flame Blast, exploded at the position of Arthas' helmet at absolute zero distance. Boom. The mushroom that soared into the sky was clearly visible through the towering city walls. That's Kale Vats, who was about to rest, looked at the sudden explosion in the city in shock. He suddenly stood up and no longer cared about his elegance. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "It's Arthas! Another Earthies? How is this possible?" News of the engagement with Earthies was transmitted from both the east and west ends of the Icecrown Glacier at the same time, causing the entire communication network of the Allied forces to be thrown into disarray. To Arthas? When did he have a brother? At the same time, the image that was broadcasted on the magic mirror was also incomprehensible. In the west, a certain Earthies was summoning ice elemental powers that could shatter the heavens and shatter the earth, and was engaged in a fierce battle with the demigod Duque. In the east, the mighty Breaking Dawn expert Anastrian had been captured. The Sun King's Flame Blast was extremely powerful. One could see that the surroundings of the gigantic Netherworld Tower were already beginning to melt. It was easy to destroy the Netherworld Tower with a cannonball, but it was extremely difficult to melt all the fragments into liquid. From this, it could be seen that Anastrian had not held back at all. But the Breaking Dawn rank Flame Blast, which was already terrifying in the eyes of mortals, had not been able to penetrate the ice elemental shield wrapped around the Lich King's black armor. The mysteriousness of a low rank had vanished in front of the mysteriousness of a higher rank. No! With a blood-curdling scream, the Lich King's hand that had pierced through the Sun King's craggy chest turned into a palm. Arthas exerted some force, as if she was holding on to something. Only professionals of a certain level could see that it was a semi-illusory, beating heart. That was Anastrian's heart, and also the core of his soul. Arthas abruptly retracted his arm and pulled out the translucent heart, which instantly turned into a ball of liquid that flickered with a blue radiance. With a slap, a palm stained with the blue liquid was imprinted on the right side of the Sun King's skull. Arthas's thick and murderous voice echoed throughout the entire city of Calamity. "Pledge your loyalty to the great Lich King." Out of the expectations of every tribe, the Sun King, who had never bowed to anyone and would only bow slightly in front of the great chief, actually knelt on one knee before Arthas and shouted, "For you, His Majesty, the Supreme Lich King." A king kneeling to a king. This meant, unable to hold back the rage in his heart, Dranos, who had recovered from his shock, roared, "Perish! Arthas!" He immediately unleashed a full-force leap slash. Letting the body soar into the air without any leverage was actually a rather foolish way of fighting. But when the leap slash was infused with the power of the warrior's spiritual condensation, fury, an ordinary leap slash became a terrifying attack that could split the heavens and the earth. A deafening howl, an extremely ferocious face, an angry mouth filled with fangs that symbolized brutality. If it were any other opponent, they might have been intimidated by his frightening aura. Unfortunately, he was Earthes, the strongest Death Knight in the world. The attack that was extremely terrifying in the eyes of others was just a huge piece of meat sent to the blade of Earthes' sword. With his left hand still pressed against the Sun King's skeletal face, Earthes' right body made a striding motion. With just a glance, a death's grasp that Dranos could not match was unleashed. A giant illusory hand that could not be seen by the naked eye suddenly appeared in the void, grabbing the enraged orc and pressing his chest onto the blade of Frostmourne. Anoken. Delano's round eyes bulged out due to the impending death. His eyes were bloodshot. Even at the moment of his death, he couldn't understand what had just happened. How did he lose his balance and control of his body? How did he die? Young Salyafar did not have time to find the answer. An extremely cold and terrifying suction force came from the runic greatsword that pierced through his chest, instantly freezing his body that was not cold yet, and pulling his burning soul into an extremely cold soul hell. No! Amidst the cries of disbelief, the entire tribe exploded. Was this scene real or fake? It was just one move. Two powerful tribe leaders, one dead and the other surrendered? How terrifying was the Lich King Earthes? Chapter 1682. In war, information was important, but real-time information was even more important. 25 years ago, orders had to be passed on by foot. If it wasn't horses, then it was griffins. That outdated method of sending orders on the battlefield had long been swept aside by the Allied army. After using the magic communication network, who would want to send orders without a reply after a long time? After working with the Alliance for so long, the tribal leaders had long since become accustomed to using the magic communication network to do battle. Of course, in order to prevent being tricked by the Alliance, Sar had privately asked Pharaoh, led by Anastrian, to create a unique magic communication network for the tribe. When working with the Alliance, they naturally used the alliances. After all, with a demigod like Duque, the communication was definitely fast and good. In addition to the telephone-like magic communication that couldn't see faces, Duque also had the Alliance add a multi-screen real-time video broadcast. Although it was said that he had learned it from the Pantheon and the Burning Legion's void battleships, it was actually all his transmigrated knowledge. Whenever the Allied army fought a battle of 1,000 people, at least 3 sky mages would be sent to observe the battlefield. These pharaohs didn't do anything but control the mages' eyes to transmit the images they saw through the magic network and finally to the Allied army's headquarters. The headquarters also had a rather modern feel to it. Divided into categories, each small battlefield would have more than 3 girls with good eyesight. They were both inspectors and messengers. Behind these girls were commanders of all levels. In the sloping command post, orders were directly passed down from the highest level to the battlefield commanders. It was precisely because of such a modern command system that everyone quickly learned of the shocking fact that one of the tribe's leaders had died and the other had surrendered. No, Varrock Salyafar, who was rushing over with his troops, was furious. He had seen his son's death in the magic mirror. Impossible. Sar, who was far away in the Kalimdor continent's Orgrimmar, was extremely shocked. He couldn't accept the fact that the tribe had suddenly lost the leader of one of its main races. There were now 5 major races in the tribe, and each one had an indispensable role. The most numerous beastmen were undoubtedly the cornerstone of the tribe. Whether it was warriors or warlocks, the beastmen were the most numerous. Taurens were kind and brave, and were the strongest race for assault. However, there were too few Taurens to be the main combat force. The trolls provided the best long-range attacks for the horde, and the trolls' javelins were indispensable. Although gnomes had all kinds of problems, they controlled the tribe's economy and technological development. The Forsaken. Although Anastrian had never been very respectful to Thrall, the Forsaken had given the horde soldiers a way to be reborn a second time. Not only that, almost all the mages in the tribe were forgotten ones. Mages not only provided sharp long-range attacks, but the importance of these forgotten ones who had been transformed from humans and elves had long surpassed the class itself in the current era, where communication on the battlefield was becoming more and more important. Without the support of the Alliance and Anastrian's small-scale magical communication network, the Horde would revert back to the primitive times of yelling orders. Sal suddenly stood up. He didn't even know when the armrest of the chief's throne had been crushed by him. Looking at the mysterious palm print on the Sun King's face in the magic mirror, Sal knew that Anastrian was definitely not surrendering on his own, at least not in such a humiliating way. This powerful lich, who had once broken free from the Lich King's restraint, had most likely had his will destroyed by the Lich King in direct spiritual contact, and then he had knelt down. The defeat and death of the two leaders had already made Sal extremely worried. What was even more painful was yet to come. On the city wall, the catapults that were previously in position were specially helping the Forsaken army to bombard the ghost towers in the city. But now, fire. Standing beside the catapults was Master Pharmacist Putre of the Royal Pharmacist Association of the New Undercity. Under his command, all the catapults suddenly made a crisp sound. Huge metal barrels were directly thrown into the City of Calamity, while the Horde army was at a loss. Ah, aren't those our catapults? Damn it, what is this? Most of the Forsaken and Orc warriors still didn't know that their leaders had knelt down. They were only horrified to see that their catapults had thrown something at them. The large metal barrels smashed into the city, destroying buildings and crushing people to death was a small matter. What was terrifying was what spread after the metal barrels exploded. It was clouds of yellow-green fumes. As long as they breathed in a little or touched it, be it the lively orcs or the forgotten ones who were supposed to be dead and unable to breathe, all of them let out a blood-curdling scream, subconsciously clutching their throats and collapsing. At most, they would convulse for about 10 seconds before they stopped moving. Traitor! Sal was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Even though he was the most restrained orc in the world, he couldn't control his emotions at this moment. It was obvious that the Forsaken had betrayed them. He had used some kind of new plague to shamelessly betray his compatriots and companions. The Alliance command was already in a mess. What happened? City of Calamity 1, please report. 2-2. If there's danger, retreat immediately. Just keep the magic in the magic net. But it wouldn't be so easy to leave once they came. In the blink of an eye, a terrifying chill burst forth from Arthas, who had killed young Salyafar with a single sword strike. Where the City of Calamity had originally been, a new ice wall immediately rose from the ground, trapping all the Alliance soldiers who were trying to escape. They couldn't run, and they couldn't hold up. They had to close the door and beat the dogs. The Horde soldiers fell in droves, but after a while, they stood up again as soldiers of the Calamity army. This scene drove Sal crazy. Soon the scene was cut off. Since the Lich King had descended, that terrifying elemental exclusion made it impossible for any magic to be used. Looking at the dark row of magic mirrors, Sal suddenly lost all his strength. He slumped into the great chief's seat, his eyes unfocused. Tens of thousands of troops had been wiped out in an instant. Not to mention the Horde with insufficient troops. Even the large alliance could not bear it. Although there were 2 million new orcs in the Horde, not all of them could be warriors. Excluding the relatively weak laborers, women, and children, there were only 500,000 or 600,000 young men who could fight. Previously in the Northwind Tundra, the Warsong tribe had been ruthlessly beaten up by Malygos. They had lost 100,000 people in one winter, and now it was equivalent to wiping out the entire Forsaken race, plus young Salyafar's Blackstone elites. The Horde was already badly hurt. Chapter 1683. What Thrall could not accept the most was the death of little Salyafar. Among the next generation of beastmen, Thrall had the highest hopes for him. He had the bravery of the traditional beastmen, the spirit of unity, and a good sense of the big picture. Thrall had even thought of passing the position of Great Chief to Dranos. But now it was all over. This was what the Calamity army feared the most. Once there was a large-scale annihilation, the dead soldiers would immediately become the enemy's helpers. An epic hero, Dranos, and a Breaking Dawn Great Lich. It was unknown if Arthas would strengthen their combat power. With one addition and one reduction, the difficulty of attacking the Ice Crown Fortress skyrocketed. The scene was interrupted, but it did not mean that the battle in the Calamity City was over. Oh, under the thick armor, Arthas was a little surprised. He realized that while all the Horde infantrymen had fallen, the tanks belonging to the Alliance were still firing continuously. They were rapidly blasting the Horde soldiers who had turned into Calamity warriors into pieces. The tracks of the light tanks mercilessly crushed these fellows who had been allies not long ago. How dare you? Arthas was a little angry. He raised his hand, and a tank not far from him was grabbed by a pair of large hands made of ice that grew out of the ground. One hand grabbed the chassis of the tank, and the other hand tore open the top cover of the turret, as if it was a thin piece of paper, revealing the driver inside. There was no fear, no anger, not even any emotion. The driver directly pulled out the large musket that he carried with him, and fired at Arthas. Bang, bang, bang. Arthas's movements stopped. He felt a little shocked and angry. Of course, these laughable low-energy bullets could not cause any damage to the Great Lich King. There was another reason for his shock and anger. The ones shooting at him were not living people at all. They were mechanical gnomes from Otter that Mimiron viewed as expendable. These low to moderate level of intelligence faithfully carried out Mimiron's orders, and attacked all enemies of the Calamity army until they were destroyed. Humph. Arthas did not want to see this laughable robot ever again. Even if it existed in this world for one more second, it was a mockery to him, the Lich King. 100 miles away, Arthas, who had been confronting Duque at the same time, spoke up. Duke Marcus, you knew that I would set up an ambush in the Disaster City? Duque's expression didn't look too good in the face of the stern Arthas either. He didn't want to respond at all. The weave was his, and in this place where the elements were surging, no live footage could be leaked without his permission. Only the people of Naxxramas could see this. Duque was also unhappy. That's right, he tricked the two idiots. The incident in the City of Calamity this time was like a modified version of the incident with the Gate of Heaven's Wrath. Duque, who was familiar with the original history and knew that Master Apothecary Putris would betray the Alliance, naturally wouldn't continue sending the Alliance's soldiers to their deaths. He had Mimiron's mechanical gnome sit on the Alliance's tank, just to put on a good show with a certain someone. In the original history, it was Putray and the Dreadlord Verimithas who had betrayed them, and the Allied army had no choice but to send an army to Gloom City to quell the rebellion. This bought a lot of time for Arthas. If Duque was a tribal chief, of course he would expose Putray as soon as he got the evidence, minimizing the damage that could be done to the tribe. Duque was the Alliance's commander, and this identity meant that Duque would only do things from the Alliance's point of view. The point was that Duque wasn't sure what role the Forsaken played in this incident. After all, the boss of these bones wasn't Queen Sylvanas but an Astrian. Duque did get the absolute evidence that the Sun King was in cahoots with the Burning Legion. Duque didn't want to throw out the evidence at this time. In his imagination, if he threw out the evidence at the time of Mystery of Pandaria, he would remove the Forsaken from the tribe and destroy them, which would be the most beneficial to the Alliance. Now Duque was doing a little useless work. The elites of the Forsaken were all wiped out in one go. At least on the surface, it seemed that a mere grand pharmacist had tricked all the elites of the Forsaken, including the Sun King. The combat power of the tribe was indeed weakened, but dying together in battle didn't affect the unity of the tribe. Instead, it made the tribe more united against a common enemy. If the tribe later found out that the Alliance had switched the soldiers, F***CK, no matter how good-tempered Duque was, he couldn't help but curse. Of course, what annoyed Duque the most was that Arthas also played a trick on him. Humph. Nowadays, even the Lich King has learned the cloning technique. This time, it was finally Arthas' turn to laugh. He laughed happily and arrogantly. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Duke Marcus, aren't you the one who calculates everything? I almost thought that you were the god of fate, invincible. Luckily, you are not, Duque retorted. Arthas, laugh if you want. You won't have many chances to laugh. In the sky, the elemental tides that belonged to different demigods were still colliding in midair, making continuous explosions. Without the soul voice, it was impossible to hear the voices of people 1 meter away. Arthes's voice continued to be transmitted into Duque's spirit sea. No, no, no. I'll definitely laugh until the end. However, Duque, don't you want to know why there are 2 Lich Kings? No need. I'll get the answer after I kill this you in front of me. Duque was unusually stubborn. Hee. Obviously, Dumbo laughed happily. Then he seemed to sigh and murmured to himself, "Forget it. I wanted to let you keep guessing. However, this body seems to have reached its limit." With that, Arthes began to unravel the mystery on her own. He took off his head. He did not take off the black helmet that exuded a murderous aura. Instead, he took off the helmet along with his head. Just like how a knight in military uniform would place his helmet under his armpit, he clamped his head between his legs. Damn! Duque could not help but curse. A dignified Lich King has become a headless knight? Of course, Duque knew that all the Undying had the talent split. Each of them was like Bucky the Clown in the One Piece manga. They would not die even if they were split into pieces. However, Duque knew that Nazul valued Arthes not only because of Dumbo's soul, but also because of Dumbo's strong body. In this life, Duque had tricked Arthes again and again. He had broken his arm and cut his waist. The indomitable Arthes also reattached her body over and over again. Arthes's body had long been refined into a demigod's body on the ice-ceiling throne. Without his head, how could he bear it? 3 seconds later, the mystery was revealed. The arm wrapped in the gauntlet took out a crystal skull from the helmet. Chapter 1684. At this moment, the expressions on the faces of all those who witnessed this scene froze. Probably everyone had the same thought in their minds. Holy shit! How could this happen? Others might not know what this ice crystal skull was. Duque must know. In order to punish Nazul for being half-hearted and running away, Kill Jaden played hardcore SM games with Nazul. When Nazul's body was completely destroyed, his bones turned to ashes, and he could no longer repair his cultivation. Nazul's soul was stuffed into this ice crystal skeleton. This was a cruel punishment that just thinking about it made people feel horrible. Without a body, the soul also lost its freedom. It was bound in an ice skull, suffering day and night like a frozen hell of soul torture. This was the terrifying side of the ice skull. On the other hand, it was undeniable that this thing was also the most powerful soul power amplifier. With it, Nazul's soul could control his undead subordinates from a super long distance. He could easily cross space and extend his soul touch thousands of miles away. Under the effect of the strengthened spiritual power, Nazul could also perform super long distance casting that mortals dared not imagine. Duque never thought that in order to trick him, Arthas would force a part of his soul into this crystal skull that his other half, Nazul, refused to enter even if he was beaten to death. Sure enough, ambitious people were ruthless to others, but even more ruthless to themselves. Using a part of the Lich King's soul to control the crystal skull, he used the soul energy stored under the ice throne to directly shoot at Naxxramas, and then shot at Duque. As long as no one fought him in close combat, who would find out that this Lich King, who seemed to be so powerful, was actually a fake? As for Arthas's own body, he secretly ran to the City of Calamity to cause trouble. With such a diversion, it could be said that Duque's loss was not undeserved. Both sides had stopped fighting at the same time. Violent elemental turbulence was left in the surroundings, and under the impact of the weave's mana, the ice elementals were like thousands of silver snakes twisting in a frenzy. Looking at each other from afar, the ice-ground glacier was still as cold as ever, causing Duke's cloak to flutter. Duque suddenly interjected. Arthes, you could have used this technique on a much larger scale. Who knows, he might be able to scam me even more ruthlessly. Is it worth it for you to catch an Anastrian and a Dranos? Worth it. Arthes's image was projected on the crystal helmet, and there was a hint of laughter in her voice. A mere leader of the Forgotten Ones isn't worth my effort. I'm doing this for you. Duke Marcus. Me. Duque was a little surprised. Yes. I have to admit, you are too scary. It's so terrifying that even though I've become a Lich King, I can still feel suffocated. No, it's an oppressive feeling that my soul could be annihilated at any moment. He was a little surprised that Earthies would actually admit to her cowardice. A playful expression appeared on Duque's face. I grew up listening to legends about you. Ever since I took charge, I've never won against you. Even after embarking on the path of a death knight, I've never won against you. You stole my lover. You took away the victory that belonged to me. Over and over again. Over and over again. Almost every step I took was predicted by you. Then, you gave me an incomparably painful blow. Speaking up to this point, the projection of Earthies touched her shoulders, and then touched her waist, where Duque had once broken them. When I fused with Nazul to become a true Lich King, I not only gained power, but also an even more despairing experience of failure. It wasn't until that moment that he and I realized that you had already become a nightmare for both of us. You're simply the most hateful and terrifying nightmare. Your existence itself is the biggest obstacle to our hegemony. Duque's face was filled with the word embarrassment. The second fool continued to vent his emotions. In these 20 years, we've never won against you even once. Fighting against you is simply fighting against fate itself. We're not satisfied. So even if it's a small victory, I have to win against you, Duke Marcus. Hearing this, Duque only wanted to reply to the second fool, Motherf * King Retard. Duque completely understood that these two poor fellows had already been abused like dogs by him, and had a serious psychological shadow. He didn't know if shivering plus shivering would become the square of shivering. In any case, for this kind of big villain, Duque didn't care if they died. Oh no, they were already dead. Then let them eat *T. Perhaps this was the general trend. The original Lich King Earthies in history was so domineering. Because of this, Duque had long planned to abuse him more and more fiercely over the years. Well, this could be counted as a big explosion of accumulation. An Earthies with a flaw in his heart was easier to deal with than the second fool, who was full of confidence and arrogance. Now, in order to win against Duque once, he paid an unequal amount of power. How to put it? Duque shrugged and spread his hands. Well, you beat me once. I hope you can be so talented or so lucky next time. This confrontation could only end with a small victory for the Lich King. If the fight continued, Duque could at most crush the crystal skull. That thing could also be considered a divine artifact, but it was insignificant to Earthies, so Duque wasn't interested in destroying it. Now that he knew, he would be prepared in the future. The value of that thing was about the same as a pebble on the side of the road. In the city of Calamity, 100 kilometers away. After confirming that all the coalition forces in the city of Calamity were dead, Kale, Bats gave the order to open fire. This was destined to be in vain. As one of the few magic veins in the Iceground Glacier area, the city of Calamity had an extremely strong supply of magic. With Earthies in charge, the bombardment of magic cannons was nothing more than a meaningless battle of elemental energy. Using elemental energy from afar to fight with elemental energy absorbed on the spot was as ridiculous and futile as using water from afar to put out a nearby fire. After venting for a while, Kale Bats understood the reason. Without needing Duque's reminder, he directly ordered the Dalajan to retreat. After all, the Dalajan was not a purely offensive flying fortress. If too much of the magic net was overdrawn, in the end, the Dalajan would crash into the enemy's formation at any moment. This was not worth it. Seeing the Dalajan retreat, Earthies did not chase after them. With a wave of his hand, he directly ordered the remaining Scourge soldiers to retreat through the top of the Door of Death, Mordressa, to the evil castle of Malacaris in the center of the Iceground Glacier. Chapter 1685. In the northwest, the battle where Malygos was teaching Calegos how to be a dragon also ended before Alexstrasza arrived. Today, the Dragon Lich could bully his own little brother, but he would never dare to fight his former big sister one-on-one. This time, the battle was over. It was hard to say who was the real winner. The defense line of the Iceground Glacier that Lich King Arthas had maintained was completely broken. Although the west and northwest sides were not breached, the alliance still managed to obtain the City of Calamity, an important strategic fulcrum on the plateau, on the east side of the defense line. Originally, the Calamity army could take advantage of the terrain and form a terrible strangulation formation with the Gate of Death as the center. Now, once the alliance attacked, they had to fight a war of attrition with the alliance on the relatively narrow bridge. On the other hand, the Calamity army's strength did not decrease, but increased. In addition to the loss of many giants in the direction of the Iron Wall Dam, after the new plague jointly developed by Maligos and Professor Putricide spread in the Battle of the City of Calamity, excluding those destroyed by the tanks of the mechanical gnomes, the Calamity army gained a total of 50,000 elites. Most of them were low-grade professionals. Even for the Calamity troop, which had a huge business, it was still a significant increase in strength. Originally, before Arthas left, he also removed the ice wall around the City of Calamity, hoping to further pollute the surrounding environment. Duque, who was prepared, hurriedly mobilized the Red Dragon Legion to burn the entire City of Calamity along with the plague. The battle on March 15th was over. The aftermath was still fermenting. What? You said that the Alliance seemed to be prepared for this. They only sent mechanical gnomes that wouldn't be affected by the plague into the City of Calamity, and then everyone on our side found out that the Alliance had replaced them? In Orgrimmar, Thrall clenched his fists after receiving the report. Anger? Maybe. But more than that, he was uneasy and confused. As soon as he turned around, Sal's tall body had already walked toward the magic mirror. There, a troll mage responsible for contacting the Alliance command immediately bowed to Sal. Trolls also had mages. As the ancestors of the Night Elves, trolls also had the qualifications to be mages. However, among the Darkspear trolls where Wajin was, there were not many trolls with the qualifications to be mages. Coupled with the lack of magic civilization, the number of great magi was even fewer. However, with the annihilation of the Forsaken army and the announcement of Varamisath, the Dreadlord who was now in control of the new Undercity, joining the Scourge army, the Forsaken mages had actually been forced out of the Horde's battle array. In reality, the Horde only had less than 1,000 Forsaken left. Trolls were generally not strong, and there wasn't even a Radiant Moon wizard who could be called. He could only make do with it for now. Sal sighed, and was about to speak when he heard Woking's voice coming from behind him. Great Chieftain, are you going to confront Duque? Sal didn't turn his head, but faced Woking with his stalwart back. Yes. That's right. I just couldn't take this lying down. I wanted to ask Duque why he did it. Since he found out that the tribe has a plague weapon, he could have told me. Wokin's voice was low, and it was obvious that he was also quite depressed. Don't ask. So what if he asked? It would only widen the rift between the Alliance and the Horde that had just begun to heal. Great Chieftain, there is only one reason why he did this. The Alliance is the Alliance, and the Horde is the Horde. Sal seemed to be struck by lightning and his whole body stiffened. Immediately, his mouth full of sharp teeth was filled with bitterness. Woking was indeed a man of great wisdom. He pointed out the key point in one sentence. Even after 10 years of relatively friendly and peaceful cooperation, it could not completely eliminate the estrangement between the two sides. The Alliance and the Horde were now allies. But these two behemoths were also two multiracial joint political bodies that had once fought a cruel war and had different interests. The Alliance had made too many concessions, so many that even Sal, the Great Chieftain, was a little numb. Many times, he had forgotten the hatred and unhappiness of the past, and wishfully thought that this peace and cooperation could last forever. This time there was no need to ask, it must be the Alliance guarding against the Horde. That was why Duque suddenly ordered the withdrawal of William's Eastern army, and replaced it with Mimiran's mechanical gnomes. On the other hand, wasn't the Horde also guarding against the Alliance? Among the Horde, the voices of clamoring for war against the Alliance had never stopped. Recently, with the emergence of problems such as the lack of land resources, this voice not only did not decrease, but instead became more and more intense. Sal, as a dove, went around putting out fires, but the more fires he put out, the more fires there were. Sal was simply mentally and physically exhausted. Woking pointed out the key point of the problem. But knowing the problem did not mean that it could be solved. It was completely foreseeable that the conflict would become even greater in the future. Looking at the history of the orcs, it was not difficult to find that the orcs were also very fertile. When the population was large, they would expand outward and beat up the foreign races. If there was really no place to expand, they would fight each other. Since ancient times, many clans had disappeared in the long river of history. The orcs did not care. It had been like this for hundreds of millions of years. However, the clear-headed Sal knew that this way of survival was extremely dangerous. The Alliance was already a behemoth whose strength was far above the Horde. Since the Second Battle of the Dark Portal, the Alliance had not launched a war against the Horde, not because they did not want to, but because there were stronger foreign enemies, and there was a wise leader like Duque to suppress the voices of opposition. Once the flames of war were ignited, the Alliance would most likely not be burned to death, but the Horde would definitely be destroyed. Sal was trying his best to maintain this fragile balance, trying to maintain peace with the Alliance. If the group of traditional orcs below did not grow brains and continued to make trouble, then Sal did not dare to think about it. In his mind, thousands of thoughts turned, and finally Sal was discouraged. Woking, inform Duque for me. Say that the Horde Expeditionary Army has been hit hard and needs a long time to rest in place. I hope that supplies can be prepared. Understood. Woking humbly put one hand on his chest and bowed to Sal. However, he saw the figure of the great chief become extremely lonely. Alas! At the same time, in front of the frozen throne, one burly, one thin, two figures exuding terrifying dark energy fluctuations, just like that, crawled in front of the high white throne. The supreme voice of the Lich King floated down from the top of the throne. Anastrian, are you not convinced? The body of the former Sun King shook violently, and finally squeezed out a sentence from between his teeth. I dare not. Oh, you just don't dare? Accompanied by the cold voice, the palm print branded on the right side of the Sun King's face suddenly became as black as ink. It was obviously a dark color, but it exuded an extremely hot soul-burning pain, causing Anastrian to roll on the ground in pain. Ow! Chapter 1686. After a scream, Earthy's voice floated down again. I'll ask you again. Are you afraid, or are you not convinced? If he didn't dare to speak up. If he was not convinced, he would confront him. If Anastrian was still the chief of the tribe, at least there would be Sal in front of him. But now he had no barriers. He could only use his frail body to face the Lich King who controlled the life and death of his soul. He trembled, and in his empty eye sockets, the two weak soul fires kept trembling, as if they were crying. I'm convinced. Of course I'm convinced. I am the most loyal servant of the Lich King. Having abandoned his integrity, the former Sun King was now nothing more than a humble and shameless soul. Arthas was unmoved. He shook his head. In the past, Nazul always liked to use absolute soul control. He used to think that as long as the living stepped into the realm of death, they would be under his absolute domination. Obviously, he was wrong. The Sun King trembled. Arthas held the chin of his helmet and tilted his head. You and your Forsaken once broke free from Nazul's control. This is the best proof. So for those who are worth cultivating, I prefer to let them slowly fall. Only the fall of one's own will is the deepest and most thorough fall. For example, the former me, the current Maligos, and the future you. The cold words pierced directly into the deepest part of Anastrian, making his soul tremble even more violently. Actually, I was a little surprised that you came to me. I don't know why you feel insecure in the tribe. Since you chose to make a deal, chose to become my subordinate, and desire power, I will not go back on my word. At this point, Arthas slowly walked down the ice throne. Every time she took a step, the metal leg guards would make a clattering sound as they collided with the icy surface. Each clattering sound was like a giant hammer pounding on Anastrian's soul. Arthas walked to stand in front of the Sun King. Raise your head, my servant. The Sun King was still trembling. He raised his rusty spine, so that his skeletal face was facing Arthas. He couldn't see anything. He could only see the two ghostly lights in the gaps of the helmet. If he could still swallow his saliva, He would be gulping right now. Unfortunately, he could not. It was a pressure and coldness that could even freeze souls. In front of Arthas, Anastrian felt that he was really too insignificant. It was only then that the Sun King noticed that Earthes was holding a crystal skull in her left hand. This is... Arthas' cold laughter came from under the helmet, piercing directly into the soul of the Sun King. You want to rely on me, and I allow it. However, I will use my soul imprint to make it impossible for you to betray me. You wanted power, and I allowed it. But I never promised that I wouldn't make you feel pain. At this moment, Anastrian's entire body was shaking like a leaf. He could no longer control his soul and body. He couldn't even use a single drop of magical elements. With a death's grasp, Anastrian's entire skeleton was lifted up and suspended in midair. The Lich King laughed softly, sounding like a ghost. A full 10 years. My other soul is imprisoned in this small skull. It can't go anywhere, and I can't contact my own body at all. I can only endure extreme pain 100 times more than my physical body can endure day and night. I'm tortured by the cold, cramped, and extreme pain. Of course, this thing can also greatly increase your spiritual power. As long as you fuse with this thing, you will become a real demigod. Arthas' laughter grew louder. How is it? Are you happy? The new demigod Lich. No. In that secret deal, Arthas promised to make him a demigod. If he had known that this would happen, Anastrian would have continued to hide in the tribe. Even if his dirty deal with Kill Jaden was exposed, he might still be able to hide in the new Undercity and resist stubbornly. Becoming like this was simply courting death. Come on. You should be happy. Duque has too many demigods under him. I also need more powerful demigods to help me. With that, Arthas pressed the ice skull that had imprisoned Nazul on Anastrian's face. Crack. How did it feel to have the bones in his face slowly crushed inch by inch? Even though he was no longer alive and had lost his nervous system, the pain in his soul still made Anastrian on the verge of collapse. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. He wanted to resist, but he couldn't. He could only watch helplessly, as the seemingly fragile ice skull crushed his entire skull. He felt that he had lost something forever. He didn't know what it was, but he had a vague feeling that it must be something very important. After a full 5 minutes, Arthas finally crushed the poor thing's skull into powder. A cold gust of wind blew, and the bone powder scattered on the ground was blown away without a trace. Above the Sun King's body, there was now a completely different pure white skull of ice. The skeleton that had lost its life a long time ago, under the stimulation of the rampaging dark power, made rather funny convulsions. There were even many movements where the joints were twisted. Arthas suddenly wanted to laugh. He could laugh if he wanted to. Ha 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 ha. The arrogant laughter that seemed to dominate everything in the world reverberated around the ice-ceiling throne, and then floated into the entire ice-crowned fortress, echoing non-stop. All the high-level undead creatures that could express emotions were stunned at first. Then, they immediately followed Arthas and let out unpleasant owl-like laughter. Ha! Ha 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 ha! How long did he laugh for? Arthas didn't know. He only knew that he was in an extremely good mood. Looking at the undead creature that was still convulsing laughably on the ground, Arthas instructed the Blood Queen. When he returns to normal, I want all the information he knows. The Alliance, the Horde, and the Dragon's Slumber Shrine. Yes. The Blood Queen Lanais bowed. On the other side, the Alliance held an emergency throne meeting. There was a lot of discussion. Some wanted to slow down, while others wanted to fight fiercely. Obviously, no one could convince the other. The strength of the Calamity army was still terrifying. After taking down the city of Calamity, Arthas almost pulled out all the low-level undead creatures to attack the Alliance's position. According to a conservative estimate, there were still more than 1 million elite skeleton soldiers. The number of undead creatures of different levels could not be calculated at all. Anastrian and Delano joining the Calamity army also meant that a considerable amount of information had been leaked. Chapter 1687. With Anastrian and Dranos joining the Scourge, the Horde would naturally suffer the greatest blow. One of them controlled the tribe's communication network, while the other's father was the highest-ranking military commander under Thrall. Most of the time, Varrock was the one who controlled the most troops in the tribe. Unfortunately, as Nascent's army went into a resting state, and the tribe hurriedly changed their communication system, Earthies didn't get much useful information. The Alliance had always been wary of the Horde, not to mention the Forsaken who had a direct grudge against them. If it weren't for Duque, Servanas would have already caused trouble for the Forgotten Ones. If Duque gave a hint with his eyes, Queen Sylvanas might even annihilate the Forsaken with the power of the entire country and the Night Elves. In fact, what Earthies wanted the most was the Weave. Without the Weave, the strength of the Alliance's mages would drop by at least half. It wasn't as if the Doomsday Army had never killed a mage from the Alliance before. Looking at the ferocious appearance of a certain mage when he was alive, throwing fireballs nonstop as if they were free. As soon as he turned into a lich, he was done for. The Weave had given the Alliance's mages too much support, to the point where it was like replacing a shotgun with a cannon. As long as he infused his overflowing spiritual force as the energy for the Weave to operate, he would be able to use the elements almost limitlessly in battle, as long as he didn't exceed the upper limits of his tolerance. He didn't even need to communicate with the elemental plane. All the elements had been filtered, purified, and stabilized in the Weave. As long as a mage completed the last step of elemental modeling, they would be able to cast an offensive spell that was far beyond their combat level. The Weave was Duque's lifeline and was directly under Duque. Without mastering magical abilities that were above Duque's, there was no way he could snatch it. Speaking of creating something similar to the Weave to fight against the Weave, unfortunately, even with the two master magicians, Malygos and Anastrian, they still couldn't create the magic net that belonged to the Doomsday Army. This was what infuriated Earthies the most. It couldn't be helped. Although Holy Light and Shadow were two independent elemental energies, they were pure spiritual energy. There was no independent elemental realm outside the main plane. Among the four major elements, if one wanted to obtain more elements, one would need to have higher authority on their side. Except for Earthies who had a certain amount of authority in the water elemental realm, the other two didn't. Needless to say, the Sun King hadn't reached the god domain yet. Originally, Malygos still had some authority. Unfortunately, after he was cut in half, not only did he lose his authority, but he also lost his Titan rune. It was impossible for him to control the arcane energy that the Titan energy extended. Thus, her only hope was to create a Weave of ice element and completely expel Duque's Weave. Therefore, after the Horde retreated, the battle between the Allied forces and the Calamity Army became the magical ley lines on the Iceground Glacier. The Shadow Vault was one of them, and the Calamity City was another. The remaining nodes were not completely symmetrical on the map. Their positions were also quite easy to identify because the Calamity Army had built strong fortifications on them long ago. They were the prototype vault on the north side of the Desolation Gate, or Dusa, the vault on the west side of the Death Gate, Madressa, and the Dark Cathedral and the Iceground Glacier itself. Not only were they places that the military would fight for, but they were also the nodes of the magical ley lines. Everyone knew what was going on. It was just a matter of who could seize the opportunity first. For a few days, anyone with a little bit of magical sensing ability could feel that Arthas was expanding a new ice elemental energy weave with the Iceground Fortress as the center. In contrast, Duque was also strengthening the ley lines in the Calamity City and the Shadow Vault to the north, using them as new nodes of the weave. On the 20th of March in the Calamity City, Duque came for an inspection. The Calamity City had been burned to the ground. Although the Red Dragon Army had purified the place with flames, no one could guarantee that there were still remnants of plague gas in a certain corner of the city. At this time, it was time for the non-human creatures and mechanical creations to appear. In the dilapidated city ruins, there were fire demons patrolling everywhere, as well as mechanical gnomes commanding mechanical spiders, tanks, and other mechanical creations. Duque supported his feet with the wind, opened the frost shield, and arrived at the center of the city. The gigantic ghost tower that had once existed here had already been dismantled and replaced by a Titan formation that was formed from countless golden Titan runes. Seeing Duque's arrival, Major Domo, the manager of the elemental emissaries under Duque, hurried to greet him. Master. He bowed. He had once served the fire demon Ragnaros, and now he had completely adapted to his identity. It was rare for him to have a chance to appear, so he naturally did his best. How's the progress? Duque asked. It wasn't ideal at first, but with their help we've caught up. The them that Major Domo was referring to were naturally the water elementals that were helping beside the Titan rune magic circle. These water elementals were all huge, at least 3 stories tall. Interestingly, although water and fire were clearly incompatible, the water elementals and fire demons were at least restraining each other. Duque smiled. What he was doing now was to dig out the roots of Arthas. If he simply introduced the fire elementals from the fire elemental realm, in an attempt to change the elemental ratio of this continent that was already covered in ice and snow, it would be arduous and unrewarding. Replacing Major Domo with the fire demon king Ragnaros might have a chance of success. So Duque gave up on a simple confrontation and called upon the Haitian water elementals instead. As creatures of the water elemental realm, the Haitian water elementals did not like Ragnaros, nor did they like the water elementals or water elemental creatures being contaminated by Arthas' dark power. Duque easily reached a consensus with Duque Dasis once again. The Haitian water elementals would help to draw away the overflowing frost elementals on the Iceground Glacier, and then Major Domo and the Red Dragon Legion would join forces to disrupt the magic veins in the Iceground Glacier area. This method of digging out the roots and cutting off the source was the most damaging. Duque was not in a hurry to let the Alliance advance the battle line. Like a noose, he slowly cut off Arthas' wings. Last time, the Alliance suffered a great loss because of Arthas' diversion. This time, Duque had learned his lesson. He placed a large number of troops in the Shadow Vault and the City of Calamity, and withdrew the main force in other places, leaving only symbolic defense, and they were all mechanical gnomes and mechanical dwarves. If you have the ability, why don't you turn these robots into undead creatures? In the Shadow Vault, in addition to the Black Edge Knights, there were now the 4 guardians of Alcavan working together to guard it, plus Hodier, Onyxia, Vasht and Kalegos. Chapter 1688. Naxxramas hovered in the air a little further north of the Shadow Vault, repairing itself. In Calamity City, Alexstrasza and Mimiron were in charge, with Alun helping to keep an eye on the screen from time to time. Duque was in charge of mobility. The rest of the Alliance had all retreated far away. After the Dalajan demolished the Ironwall Dam, they returned to the Crystalsong Forest, maintaining a position to provide support at any time. Varian's troops retreated back to the Silver Arena to continue training. The Allied armies were advancing with such patience that Earthies couldn't find a single opportunity to strike. He had sent a large number of low-level undead to play with the Sea of Corpses, but there were flying warships above, dragons at low altitudes, and Mimiron's mechanical army on the ground. There was no way to get the corpses of creatures, which meant that the scourge couldn't be replenished. Arthas didn't send his elites, which meant that he was actually fighting a war of attrition with Mimiron. He wouldn't be able to add any more undead to use up the metal ingots in Mimiron's warehouse. Originally, the scourge's characteristic of having more and more undead was shameless enough. Mimiron's characteristic of having unlimited metal ingots was simply the scourge's greatest nemesis. Second Fool was so angry that he wanted to curse. On this side, the main force of the Alliance was restraining Arthas. On the other side, a certain Dreadlord in Winterspring was suffering. Perhaps many beastmen in the tribe weren't interested in crossing the ocean and traveling thousands of kilometers to the north. But the tribe wouldn't tolerate betrayal. While Northrend's tribal army was resting, Sar directly summoned his direct subordinate clan, the army of the Frostwolf clan, along with the armies of the Blood Elves and Night Elves, to form an alliance and enter Winterspring to quell the rebellion. At this point in time, Winterspring's terrain was rather disgusting. It was a classic example of a place that was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Winterspring, located in the northeasternmost part of the Kalimdor continent, was surrounded by mountains. Steep cliffs up to 1,000 meters high made this land of ice and snow seem even more harsh. In a sense, a Nastrian hiding in Winterspring after escaping from Gloom City wasn't necessarily a disgust for the Alliance, or more accurately, a disgust for the Night Elves. This was because a barren land like Winterspring was disliked by the Night Elves who worshipped nature and had Druid teachings. To the northwest of Winterspring was the Night Elves' Druid Holy Land, Moonlight Woodland. To the west was the northern end of Fellwood Forest. To the southwest was Mount Hyjal. The reason why the Sun King decided to build the new Undercity here was probably because of the old grudge between his father, Desrima Sunstrider, who had been banished by the Night Elves. He also wanted to act as a nail for the tribe and stick it firmly on the edge of the Night Elves' territory. Normally speaking, the only way to enter Winterspring was through the northern end of Fellwood Forest, passing through Timbermaw Fortress, which was the territory of the bear monsters. With the development of technology, and a certain queen who hated the Forgotten became the semi-god of wind, everything changed. Between 2 points, a straight line is the shortest. Disregarding the terrain, the main city of the Horde or Grimmar was actually separated from Winterspring by Azhara. Now that Azhara was one of the most important ports in the Alliance, there were many flying battleships. When Thrall led 20,000 Frostwolf clan warriors to Azhara, he was shocked to find that Feather Moon General Chandris was leading 5,000 Night Elf Sentinels, as well as 10,000 mixed troops led by Sylvanas were already waiting there. Thrall sighed inwardly. He really didn't know what he had done to deliberately accept the Forgotten in order to nail a nail in the Alliance. The Alliance didn't protest, but in fact, the leaders of the Alliance were very unhappy. At that time, Thrall said that he was gambling, but it wasn't as if he didn't want to anger the Alliance. At that time, when they were fighting in Draenor, Thrall felt a little pleased when he saw the Alliance leaders gritting their teeth and feeling helpless. Now because of the betrayal of some of the Forgotten, the tribe actually wanted him to pull out this nail. That kind of feeling almost made Thrall sick with anger. On the surface, Duque couldn't leave because he had to deal with Arthas. But of all the people he could have sent, why did he have to send Sylvanas, who had a deep hatred for a Nastrian? Wasn't this a slap in the face? Seeing the sour expression of revenge on that pretty face, Thrall felt a pain in his balls. He really doubted that after this battle, he didn't know if he could find 1 or 2 intact pillars in the new Undercity. He couldn't not call the Alliance. The King of Gallen, Gruul, didn't listen to orders, and the rest of the Taurens and Trolls had suffered a great loss in the last Encourage Swarm incident. The lost population couldn't be made up for in such a short period of time. The only orcs who still had enough soldiers had already lost more than 100,000 in Northrend. Warsong and Blackstone of the tribe's 3 major clans had also suffered heavy losses there. In the end, only the Frostwolf clan could fight. This was the last army Thrall could fight at this stage, and it was Thrall's own clan. Relying on the Frostwolf clan alone to charge into that damned place buried deep underground in the new Undercity would definitely be a huge loss. After thinking about it, he could only pull in the Alliance. To be safe, Thrall had brought the Tauren chieftain Kane and the Troll chieftain Woken to besiege the new Undercity. It could be said that all the elites were out. It's getting late. To prevent those damn traitors from escaping, let's set off early, Queen Sylvanas said with a beaming smile. Thrall could only pretend that he didn't see Queen Sylvanas' expression, and nodded heavily. With a wave of his hand, the Frostwolf warriors immediately split into 100-man squads and boarded the flying transport ships that had been prepared in advance. On the other side, in the Winterspring Valley, in the new Undercity of the Frostwhisper Canyon in the southeasternmost part of the Winterspring Valley, the royal apothecary Putre was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. Idiot! Calm down. Stop spinning. Sitting on the throne that used to belong to the Sun King, the Dreadlord angrily rebuked. Variamitha, didn't you say that if we betrayed the tribe, we would immediately receive the protection of the Scourge army? Where's Arthas? Putre waved his arms in agitation. If you're so afraid of destruction, you shouldn't have opened the portal to return to the new Undercity. You should have directly followed Arthas. The Dreadlord sneered. What a joke. My collection, my research manuscripts are all here. And didn't His Majesty Anastrian say that the new Undercity would become the bridgehead for the Scourge army to conquer Kalimdor? Where are the soldiers of the Scourge army now? Variamatha was also annoyed. They hadn't participated in the negotiations, so they had no idea what the Sun King and the Lich King had discussed. In any case, they all felt like they had been cheated. What made them most depressed was that the geographical location of the new Undercity was a bit tricky. Chapter 1689. 10 years ago, when Anastrian left Lordaeron with the defeated remnants of the Forgotten, there were no flying battleships. The Alliance Air Force was dominated by griffins. Therefore, the location of the new Undercity was chosen in the disgusting terrain of the Frost Whisper Canyon. By land, it was normal to first pass through Timbermaw Fortress, have a friendly exchange with the ferocious Timbermaw Bear, and then follow the smoothest road under the valley, all the way east, bypassing Perpetual Moon Town, playing games with the Frozen Chimera on the way, playing games with an army of blue dragons, and then being beaten half to death by wandering yetis before finally arriving at the Frost Whisper Canyon, which was easy to defend and difficult to attack. In Winterspring, where the terrain was dozens of degrees below zero, and the terrain was complex, tanks, vehicles, and cannons were not useful. If you want to come in, use infantry to kill people. It should have been like this. Unfortunately, the emergence of the flying battleship broke all the old military common sense. The Alliance army didn't need to specifically go to Timbermaw Fortress. I flew directly over the mountains from Azhara. Originally, flying a spacecraft in the mountains was also a considerable risk, because the closer to the mountains, the more wind passed through the mountains or canyons, and then the turbulence formed. It was easy for the spacecraft to lose control and crash. However, the Alliance had Queen Sylvanas. As a demigod of wind, Sylvanas might not be able to summon a gale and double the speed of the entire fleet, but if she were to sense the direction and speed of the wind, she would be able to give the fleet the most accurate direction. That would be an easy task. After Sal led the warriors of the Frostwolf clan on the transport ship, just 4 hours later, the Alliance army fleet had arrived over the Frost Whisper Canyon. The cold wind was whistling, and the chill was like a knife scraping his face. Riding on a wyvern, Sal was deep in thought. He felt as if he had returned to more than a decade ago, when he found his lost Frostwolf clan compatriots in the hidden valley of the Alterac Mountains. Very easily, Sal took Wajin and his guards and found the spaceship where Sylvanas was. It was the largest battleship in the fleet. It was not a standard battleship of the Alliance, but a gift from Duque to his lover. The decorations of this ship alone cost 10 times the cost of an ordinary battleship. Her beauty was almost dazzling, which was a typical elven style. Although the Blood Elves were born from the High Elves, they were still of the same lineage. The ship's golden paint was mostly made up of fiery red hollow metal fittings. The huge propellers were covered by flying wing-shaped decorations. From afar, it looked like a pair of dragon eagle wings. It was as flashy as it could get. Even if they were 3 or 5 kilometers away, they would definitely recognize him. The Alliance had already played around with the flying battleships, but the Horde's flying battleships had only just begun. In fact, the Horde already had a few flying battleships, but they were obsolete models that the Alliance no longer wanted. The tribe owed the Alliance a huge debt that they couldn't pay. Only the Rusty Water conglomerate bought it for imitation. The results of the imitation weren't good. Due to the lack of an industrial foundation, many of the parts could only be polished by the gnome craftsmen. Gnomes were known to be sloppy in both inventing and working. It looked like the same thing, but it was completely different when used. Several tests of flying into the air ended in failure, and 3 imitations of the flying battleships crashed. It didn't matter if he couldn't imitate it. This group of brain-dead gnomes also courted death. They forcibly repaired a good ship and turned it into a broken ship. When Wajin shamelessly asked the gnome craftsman to repair it and found the problem and reported it to Wajin, the gnomes refused to admit it, which made Wajin angry. As a result, the only usable flying battleship in the entire tribe was left in Orgrimmar. The gnomes were not without contributions. At least, they made the gnome airship. That thing was an improved version of the gnome's hot air balloon from more than 20 years ago. Although the failure rate of each flight was constant at 100%, and the crash rate was 20%. After Sal limited the flying height of the gnome airship to not exceed 20 meters from the ground, there were not many deaths. For the time being, it met the needs of long-distance flight. However, it was infuriating to compare with others. Why were the gnomes of the Alliance so much more reliable than the gnomes of the Horde? While he was a little confused, Sal and his party flew to Queen Sylvia's flagship, Windrunner. In a sense, the Windrunner was a combination of a spaceship and a gunship. Unlike the existing flying battleships of the Alliance, the entire upper deck of the Windrunner was empty. The front half was a flat flight deck with 6 sloping entrances towards the stern for birds to enter and exit. The back half was a landing area. In addition to the normal landing area, there were several huge fishnet-like things that could be bounced up. The inspiration came from the grappling rope that an aircraft carrier used to quickly stop an aircraft. The middle deck was also a medium cannon with a firing range of only 180 degrees, and a hemispherical cover that surrounded the entire ship. Those covers were actually magic cannons. Compared with the kinetic cannons that used gunpowder, the magic cannons were not weaker. Unfortunately, because of the elemental dissipation, the range of the magic cannons was shorter. In contrast, the magic cannons did not have much recoil. Only under the ship were a few triple 283mm kinetic cannons, which were of pod design. Looking at the new equipment of the Alliance, Sal could only feel envy in his heart. The difference was too great, he could not even be jealous. The wyvern flapped its wings and landed on the flight deck. Thrall jumped down and saw a familiar elven general, Haduran Brightwing. Her Majesty the Queen is waiting for you on the bridge. Please come with me. Okay, Sal said, and Dworkin and the guards followed. Perhaps it was considering that every flagship needed to carry out multiracial joint operations. The door where the bridge was located was quite large, 3.5 meters high. An ordinary Taurens could easily enter. Opening the door, Sal quickly saw 2 elves, surrounding a 3-dimensional topographic map and pointing. Sal, we need detailed information about the new Undercity. The more detailed, the better. Duque sent a big guy. If we are lucky, this thing can save us thousands of lives. Sal and Dworkin looked at each other, and sighed at the same time. After the Undercity was blown up, the Forsaken fell into a state of madness. The new Undercity's defense was even more fierce. The underground passages were curved, and no matter how many people were killed, it would not be enough to attack. However, traitors must pay the price, otherwise anyone could betray in the future. It was because the tribe had to severely punish traitors, and did not want to pay the price of too many elites, that there was room for the Alliance to intervene. Dworkin stepped forward. The core area of the new Undercity is located 300 feet below the Frostwhisper Canyon. Chapter 1690. Woken introduced the situation of the new Undercity to the 2 female elven leaders. First, we need to go through a magic elevator that is 150 feet deep to reach the main passage in the periphery. Note that this elevator is also a killing trap. There were special winches at the top and bottom of the elevator. If one did not enter from the inside of the elevator, once the trap on the elevator was activated, everyone would be hanged to death. That's why we can't use a simple lift to reach the main passage. Then there's a horizontal passage here, but their vents feel a little strange. Now that their royal pharmacist has betrayed them, it's impossible. I'm afraid they'll spread plague gas through the ventilation holes. After passing through the main passage, there is a downward slope. Previously, we took a diagonal elevator down, but I saw that there was more than one set of rolling stones on the top of the elevator. If there are enemies, this slope is not safe. Oh, I heard that in order to prevent the dwarves from digging in, they drew an underground hot spring river that doesn't freeze. If they dig in carelessly, the tunnel will fill with water in minutes. Then, Eugene talked for 10 minutes in one go and marked the routes he knew as much as possible on the 3D map. Servanas and Chandris felt their scalps go numb after hearing this. If they used elite soldiers to force their way through, it was unknown how many people would have to die before they could settle it. No wonder the damned master pharmacist and the Dreadlord refused to leave without any reinforcements. It was because this mouse hole was the most powerful and safest place. Queen Sylvie made a pressing gesture with her hands and said, Well, let's not discuss these details first. No discussion? Sal and Wajin were stunned. After all, the vanguard this time was a Frost Wolf Beast man. The Alliance doesn't care about the lives of the Frost Wolf Beast men? It was Chandris who explained. No, entering the city is the last step. Let's open up a path with bombs first. Bombing? Could it be that the Alliance's cannonballs could already threaten 300 feet underground? This thought made the two tribal leaders shudder. Queen Sylvanas raised her hand, and an elf mage of the royal family immediately opened a magic mirror. The mirror showed a huge spherical bomb. The Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza is very angry at those who spread the plague. This was a blasphemy against life and nature. Such a person must be punished with destruction. Therefore, she asked the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu to make this magic bomb called Fatty. When this thing explodes, it can produce an effect equivalent to 60% of Nozdormu's combat power. Sal and Wajin didn't know how terrifying Nozdormu's 60% power was. However, a mysterious dragon king who had mastered the power of time always made people feel that it was amazing even though they did not understand it. Of course, Nozdormu isn't willing to kill or destroy anything in this world, because it would go against his duty. I asked Duque to help me prepare the second bomb, little boy. At this point, when she used the magic mirror to show the second big bomb, Queen Sylvanas' beautiful lips curled into a resentful smile. It was a smile of extreme anger. Little boy. Sal could not understand the bad taste of a transmigrator who regarded explosions as art. Queen Sylvie shrugged. Duke and Magni created this horrible thing. Nobody knows how powerful it is except for them. The second bomb in the picture had a completely different feeling from the first one. The first, Fatty, gave Sal the feeling of mystery, that kind of unknown uncertainty, like a whisper, always teasing his heart, making him eager to see what would happen when Fatty exploded. The second, little boy, had a violent and restless aura. Even through the screen, Thrall, who had already begun to study the path of shamans, could clearly feel that the amount of fire elemental energy that Duke had compressed in this thing was definitely astronomical. Sylvanas asked seriously, "Let me confirm one last time. In order to punish the tribe's traitor Putre and the Forgotten Ones who betrayed the tribe, it wouldn't matter if the Alliance launched a powerful attack and blew up New Gloom City, right? Even if Winterspring becomes a dangerous place, is that right?" Sal and Wajin looked at each other, and then nodded at the same time. Yes. Sal had to make such a decision. The warriors of the Frostwolf clan were his last hope. If even the Frostwolf was destroyed, he would not be able to control the situation. And Winterspring actually had nothing to do with the tribe. The Forsaken Ones had never truly ruled over this place or occupied some of the mines. It was extremely cold here, and there were many magic beasts. Even the Frostwolf beastmen did not want to live here. Moreover, this place was completely isolated by the Alliance. It was a complete enclave. In the past, the Forsaken could still be used as a nail to make things difficult for the Alliance. Now that even the Forsaken had rebelled, there was no point in restraining the enclave. Sal couldn't move his entire Frostwolf clan here. And then every time there was a tribal exchange or something, he had to look at the Alliance's face before he could cross the border, right? When Sal agreed to the Alliance's decision, the fate of the new Undercity was sealed. There was no organized air force in the new Undercity. There was no need to fight at all. And the Alliance gained air supremacy. Under the cover of a group of flying battleships, a big-bellied spaceship flew unsteadily over the Frostwhisper Canyon. Then it opened its huge metal belly, revealing the bomb that was the size of a small house. Fatty, fire. Following Queen Seath's order, the huge magic bomb began a free fall at an altitude of 1 kilometer. At this moment, when the bomb fell to the ground, it felt like the inner liner of a thermos bottle had exploded. It was as if a layer of liquid or gas had spread across the ice layer at the bottom of the Frostwhisper Canyon the moment the bomb exploded. It seemed useless, but after a few seconds, whether it was Sal, Queen Seath, or all the Alliance soldiers who were watching this scene had a shocked look on their faces. In the entire Frostwhisper Canyon, every iceberg, every steep wall, every rock covered in ice and snow on the ground silently melted. It was like a huge bunker made of sand was directly blown away by the wind. under the guidance of Queen Seath. The cold wind blew from west to east, directly blowing away the rock and ice wall that had turned into powder. This scene was like an invisible giant spoon, easily digging out the Frostwhisper Canyon again and again. Only then did everyone remember that the Space Dragon King Nosdormu had never shown his true form in front of outsiders. He only summoned quicksand from around him to build his body. Chapter 1691. It was just that no one had thought that Nosdormu's ability to turn everything into sand and then transform it into his own body would be terrifying when used in ordinary battles. No matter how strong a castle was, it could not withstand the erosion of time. No matter how thick the rock layer was, it could not withstand the tide of sand transformation. So what if it was 300 feet? Right now, just by looking at it, at least 250 feet of frozen earth and rock layers had been directly turned into sand, blown away by the fierce winds that lingered in Winterspring Valley. Looking at Nosdormu's rarely exposed power, looking at the bow of the Windrunner, looking at the Elf Queen's golden hair dancing wildly as she summoned the wind, Sal and Wajin were so shocked that they could not say a word. As if he had already expected the power of Nosdormu's move, when the entire Frostwhisper Canyon was almost dug out. The second transport ship with a big belly flew shakily to the top of the new Undercity. It was completely in front of Sal. Servanas laughed loudly in front of a group of blood elves. His laughter was full of wanton and hatred. Ha! Ha 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 ha! Anastrian, you betrayed your people for your ridiculous immortality. Do you really think that no one can deal with your shamelessness? Do you really think that the blood elves can't take revenge on you just because you found a new backer? Let me tell you, this is wishful thinking. It's not that the time hasn't come yet. The time has come, all of them will be avenged. Ha 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 ha. The blood elves laughed along. The elves were arrogant. For thousands of years, they had always boasted that they were a great race that stood at the peak of civilization. However, this great race suffered the most serious setbacks in the second and third battles of the Dark Portal. The Longsong Forest was destroyed twice, and even Silvermoon City was bombed. Their king even threw himself into the arms of the undead king for immortality. The humiliation of having their glory trampled on, and the humiliation of being betrayed, had always weighed heavily on the hearts of the elves. Times had changed, and the elves had to follow the trend and throw themselves into the arms of the Alliance under the leadership of Servanas. However, with their long lives, they had never forgotten this embarrassment. Many times, even the support from the Alliance was seen as charity. However, this emotion was well guided by Servanas' subordinate, Rothelma Theron. The anger in the hearts of the people needed a target to vent, and the Sun King, who had betrayed the people in pursuit of immortality, was the best target. If he had forcibly changed his mind after being killed, it might have been forgivable. However, he was pressured and persuaded to voluntarily transform into a lich as a living being. This sin could never be washed away. In fact, after the Forsaken joined the Horde, the Alliance forbade the Blood Elves from deliberately causing trouble for the Forsaken. The Blood Elves hated the higher-ups of the Alliance because of this. Now that they had finally gotten their revenge, the Blood Elves immediately let out wild cheers. At this moment, this scene was being broadcasted to the entire Sindorii Kingdom by Queen Sylvie using magic. With the prior announcement, the people all knew that today, their queen would lead an army to wipe out those traitors. Alright. Well done. Blow up those traitors. In the entire Sindorii Kingdom, the people were excited. They held Servanas' portrait high, and at the same time, they burned dummies with Anastrian's name in various large squares. In the Dalajan city, Prince Kale, that's looked at the images from all over the Sindorii Kingdom. At this moment, all the high elves in the Dalajan were anxious. In front of his supporters and the neutral elves, he also burned a dummy of his father, and then announced a decision that he had been preparing for a long time. I, Kale that Sunstrider, officially announced today that I will abandon the surname Sunstrider. I will give myself a new surname, Eversong. To be honest, Kale that's Eversong did not sound domineering at all. However, this represented Kale that's political attitude. It symbolized that he had completely severed his identity as a prince, and he would never inherit the political legacy of his father. The surname Eversong, which represented the Eversong Forest, was more neutral. It not only expressed his attachment and love for his hometown, but also showed that he was closer to the Ranger faction. He could be the president of the Dalajan, but in the end, when his destiny was over, Kale, that still thought that he could return to his roots. His political signal was responded to by the Queen. Lord That's came. She opened a portal and nodded at Kale That's. He nodded at Kale That's, stayed for a few minutes, and then left without saying anything. Everyone knew that this meant that the ruling Ranger faction had accepted Kale That's and his followers. Above the Frostwhisper Canyon, the big bomb with the words "for the traitor" written in Elvish text slowly fell, and began to free fall under the gaze of tens of thousands of elves in the magic mirror of the live broadcast. A moment later, a terrifying light that seemed to be able to burn the retinas of mortals lit up below. It was a dazzling light that was like the rising sun. With a loud rumble, a small mushroom cloud rose in the canyon. A huge shockwave directly swept up an even higher and more terrifying cloud of dust and stones, rushing in all directions. At that moment, the sky and the earth lost color. In the political fleet in the sky, no one made a sound. Everyone was deeply shocked by this exaggerated scene. In the Naxxrama's command post, Duque curled his lips. It's not a day of nuclear annihilation yet. The data in the system prompt made Duque a little unhappy. In the eyes of others, this was already very terrifying. But the system data said, it's equivalent to 2,000 tons of TNT. Duque scratched his head. Sure enough, if it's not nuclear energy, it won't be that powerful? A few years ago, Duque used the system to clean up the little stuff in his head. And after a long time of pointing and pointing, the Alliance completed the research of TNT and the emergence of modern artillery. However, the more advanced theory of the atomic bomb was not something that a college student like Duque could come into contact with. Knowing the most superficial principles didn't mean having the knowledge and industrial foundation to research. The technology tree had already climbed to an exaggerated level, and if the steps were forcibly pulled any further, it would pull the balls. Compress fire elements with demigod-level magic power, and loaded with 10 tons of TNT, this was already the limit of what conventional weapons could achieve. However, it's good that there's no nuclear radiation. At least we can dismantle those bones in the new Undercity. In the video, the last layer of rock blocking the top of the new Undercity had been destroyed. In the gradually settling smoke and dust, everyone could see the upper buildings of the new Undercity. Queen Sylvanas jumped down first. She turned into a terrifying tornado and blew away all the small gravel blocking the gap. There was no need for her to give any instructions. The other commanders on the battlefield easily found a way to break through. Kill. Destroy those traitors. For the blood debt of Sindorii. Chapter 1692. It had to be said that a Nastrian had really put in a lot of effort for this new nest. In the absence of human resources, it could be said that he had made full use of the mechanics. It was just that his poor imagination had limited the construction of the new Undercity. He had never imagined that the 100-meter rock stratum that he relied on as an absolute barrier would be broken in such a way. No matter how many traps he had set up outside the new Undercity, what was the use of them? They would not pass through your traps at all, and would directly enter the deepest part of your nest. Unless you had a bunch of big bombs hidden in your house, and were prepared to die together with your enemies, the Forsaken who had participated in this betrayal would definitely kneel down. Seeing the Beastmen and Blood Elf army descending from the city dome that was supposed to be a rock stratum, the Forsaken were all frightened. Ah, don't kill me. I've been kidnapped. A Forsaken shouted. Unfortunately, what greeted him were the golden warhammers of the Blood Elf Paladins, the holy golden arrows of the Blood Elf Rangers, and even the giant axes of the Beastmen warriors. Hijacked. Innocent? Perhaps it was. But everyone knew that those who had nothing to do with the great potion master Putre had long been killed by his new plague in the Battle of the Calamity City, and had returned to the Lich King's command. The rest were either his hardcore accomplices, or at least neutrals, who knew what had happened but did not report it. It was not that Tsar had not thought of screening these guys. After all, the tribe still needed the Forsaken mages. But Wujin reminded him that the anger of the beastmen being betrayed could only be extinguished by destruction and death. In any case, the Blackrock tribe had been betrayed again. This was an ironclad fact. The last time was the incident of the Black Hand brothers 20 years ago. For glory, for the discipline of the army, and for the stability of the tribe, Varrock Salyafar, who had already set off for Northrend, would definitely suppress the remaining Blackrock beastmen and other beastmen from other clans who had been deceived in the Calamity City that day. But every pair of eyes was watching the great chief's every move. The beastmen could allow those who disagreed to leave, but they absolutely could not tolerate this kind of betrayal on the battlefield. Therefore, the elite assault troops led by the Frostwolf clan were even more ruthless than the Blood Elves. Besides, you claimed that you were innocent, yet you had the right to move freely in the new Undercity when you announced that you were leaving the tribe. Who were you trying to fool? None of the Forgotten Ones still in the new Undercity were innocent. When the huge battle axe descended, the Undyings whose muscles had long since lost their tenacity were torn apart. His head was chopped into a rotten watermelon. His arms and legs were cut off like broken firewood, and his body was like a rotten rag bag, with the blackened and withered organs falling out. Blood-curdling screams and wails of despair could be heard everywhere. It was the same for the Beastmen and the Blood Elves. There were no surrenders, and all the corpses of the Forgotten Ones were completely destroyed. The Blood Elf priests and holy knights who followed up immediately sprinkled holy light and holy water, purifying all souls that could turn into vengeful spirits. Ha ha ha. Sylvanas brandished the divine artifact longbow, Solidar Stars of Fury, and happily slaughtered the Forsaken. That's right, he wasn't shooting arrows. Instead, he was using the curved structure of the longbow to slash the fleeing Forsaken with a martial technique that resembled a machete. They were directly breached from the inside. Coupled with the huge explosion of the Great Bomb, many of the tunnels collapsed. The Forsaken ran around like blind flies before they were killed by the allied forces that caught up to them. No. Great Chief, don't kill me, I can serve you. The captured royal pharmacist Putre screamed in fear. Serve you? Go to hell and be a slave to your traitorous compatriots for millions of years. In front of the accompanying troll mages, and under the live broadcast of the magic mirror, Sal grabbed Putre's collar and ruthlessly threw him to the ground. The heavy and enormous combat boots stomped on Presley's waist, and with a crisp crack, that guy's entire lumbar vertebra and pelvic bones exploded. This is the fate of traitors. Sal roared domineeringly, raising the hammer of destruction in his hand. Through the magic mirror, the beastmen who were still resting in Northrend could clearly see their great chief's black hammer ruthlessly smashing down, smashing the head of that damn traitor into a rotten watermelon. A rotten watermelon that had expired. Every beastman raised their arms or weapons at this moment, letting out deafening roars. Well done. Kill the traitor. This is the price of betrayal. On the other side, Sylvanas found the Dreadlord Verimithus. Almost as soon as she saw him, Queen Sylvanas felt as if she was in a predestined battle. She did not know that this sinister-looking demon in front of her would become her subordinate in the original space and time. She also did not know that in the gates of heaven's wrath, he had also betrayed her. At this point in time, Queen Sylvanas only knew that this disgusting guy in front of her was one of the main culprits who had participated in the destruction of Longsong Forest and Silvermoon City. No, I can. The Dreadlord had no moral integrity. Perhaps other demons hated death, but they were not too afraid of it. Verimithus was different. Back then, he had entered Azeroth as a supervisor of the Scourge army. Later, after Archimonde died, he and the other Dreadlords first sought refuge with Arthas, and then were instigated by Anastrian. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was a slave of 3 different surnames. It would be better if he did not die, but once he died, his soul would be forced back into the twisting nether. Although the 3 leaders of the Burning Legion were now kneeling, who could guarantee that they would not come back to deal with him when they resurrected in the future? Thus he knelt before Queen Sylvanas on the spot. Unfortunately, if Sylvanas was the Forsaken Queen who had just taken over the Forsaken in the original history, and was extremely lacking in power and helpers, she might have tolerated him. Now that she was the demigod of Azeroth, the true Queen of the Elves, and the partner of the Alliance Commander Duque. Did she need a slave of 3 different surnames to be her subordinate? Stop joking. Sylvanas did not even care about him. All she wanted was destruction and revenge. Good for the Scourge army. Good for the Forsaken. Good for the demons. Destroy them all. Wind elements completely exploded from Queen Sylvanas' body. A violent aura, overflowing with divinity, almost filled every corner of this dark palace. When he saw the lightning bursting from Queen Sylvanas' divine longbow, the Dreadlord no longer had any hopes of getting lucky. He pounced over, and with a wave of his hand, a large ball of stinky, rotten bee swarm was thrown over. Unfortunately, the dazzling lightning arrived with a loud rumble, turning everything in the large room into nothingness. The violent thunderbolts destroyed everything. Chapter 1693. The mighty Dreadlord had been blasted into smithereens by Queen Sylvie's furious attack. No, there were 2 pieces of hooves left, but Riataline, the leader of the Blood Elf Paladins, opened a portal to catch up with the second half of the battle. She directly went up with a big hammer, and threw something like God's Wrath, smashing Verimithas into nothing. Demons were not afraid of dying from ordinary elemental attacks, but as a spiritual energy type of holy attacks, the demons were very hurt. Perhaps there would be a day when Verimithas would make a comeback, but mortals would not be able to see it anyway. There might be remnants of the Forsaken in those secret passages, and there might be powerful undead such as the Abomination hiding in dark corners. But it was the tribe's business to clean up the remnants. If the Alliance stayed here for too long, it would be a bit of a slap in the face. That night after the battle, Queen Sylvanas withdrew with her people. The Elven army was also the main force against the Scourge. After pulling out this nail that was likely to cause a disaster, the Alliance could finally concentrate all its forces against the Scourge. While Queen Sylvanas and Sal were annihilating the traitors, many battles broke out in the Iceground Glacier. There was no winning or losing, it was simply a matter of exhausting the opponent's war potential. In order to overturn the Scourge, Duque asked Willan to come forward and transfer 2 Naru. One was in charge of Naxxramas, and the other was in charge of the Dalajan. Using the 2 floating cities as bases, they produced a large amount of holy water. Cannonballs were covered with holy water, weapons were covered with holy water, and even in all the upwind directions of the Iceground Glacier, Duque had people pour a large amount of low-purity holy water. The Scourge looked like they wanted to poison all the creatures in the world with a plague. The Alliance army looked like they wanted to purify all of Northrend with holy light. During this period, around the evil castle, Maricaris, there were many battles between the Alliance army and the Scourge. The biting cold wind blew the ice dust on the frozen plateau, and the cold fog rolled up like 1,000 layers of waves, layer upon layer, surging into the distance. In the wind that whistled like ghosts all year round, a large number of humanoid objects were slowly moving forward against this icy wind. Even in spring, the temperature in the Iceground Glacier would not be higher than 0 degrees. The cold wind rolled up the ice dust and blew the armor of this group of humanoid objects, and the cold wind invaded their bodies, but they still did not feel it, because they had all died a long time ago. Woo woo woo. A shrill alarm sounded from the east side of the mountain wall. The mountain wall that seemed to be a part of the dead world suddenly came to life. Countless people came out of the caves and tunnels, and quickly entered the designated positions. These bones are coming every hour. They're really not tired of it. A soldier teased. Shut up. If we didn't have enough troops to rotate, we would have become like them. An Alliance officer scolded his subordinate. This was a plateau close to the Gate of Death, Mordressa, in the east of the Iceground Glacier. At this moment, the Scourge soldiers were gradually approaching the Alliance's position on the eastern mountain wall. They were the first to enter the range of the cannons. Katyusha, fire 3 consecutive shots. The highest commander of the camp, Lilith Windrunner, ordered calmly. Orders from General Windrunner. Katyusha, fire 3 bursts. The colonels and lieutenants in charge of each sector gave their orders. Although the large-caliber cannons were very powerful and could kill all the Undying within a radius of tens of meters, it was not worth it for the Scourge army's zombies tactic. Heavy cannons of more than 150 millimeters were more suitable for bombing high-value targets such as fortresses, not these skeletons and zombies that Arthas saw as purely expendable. The first to fire was, of course, the Katyusha rocket launcher. Thousands of rockets flew across the sky, creating an artificial meteor shower. Boom! Flesh and blood flew everywhere, limbs exploded, and ice shards splashed everywhere. If it was an ordinary mortal army's infantry, facing such a terrifying attack, they would have collapsed or at least stopped advancing. However, the Scourge soldiers, who had no sense of pain and no consciousness, continued to limp forward. Even if their lower bodies were blown off, they still used their remaining arms to maintain their posture of crawling. In other places, perhaps Katyusha would have been enough to solve all the problems. This was the extremely cold Icecrown Glacier. Even though the surrounding mana veins had been invaded by Duque, violent cold winds still blew all year round. The Katyusha rockets landed on the ground. Other than the initial damage caused by the explosion, the fire that should have caused a second round of damage was extinguished by the cold wind. Even if there were any remnants of the fire, it would be extinguished by shadow wizards and low-level liches with their blizzard. On the Alliance's side, the Katyusha that had fired all the rockets quickly retreated, allowing the Katyusha that was fully loaded with rockets to replace it. Within the scope of the binoculars, the Sea of Undead, which was originally densely packed like a tidal wave, had become a little sparse. Fire the small caliber cannons quickly. Target the enemy's large undead creatures. Immediately, more trapdoors on the mountain wall opened, and long cannons extended out, revealing dark muzzles. The cannoneers hiding behind the cannons were looking through the cannons. This was the mainstream support cannon of the Alliance, the 88mm anti-aircraft cannon. These cannons could be used to attack ice dragons and abominations. It was versatile. They aimed at the gigantic undead monsters on the plateau, and pulled the trigger of the cannons. Bang! Bang! Hundreds of holes on the mountain wall emitted black smoke from the cannons. Not only that, the 40mm Bofors anti-air cannons that were specially installed at the front line also started to fire at the larger undead creatures. Everyone knew that the Calamity Army had ice dragons that were only left with bones. In actual combat, there were also many skeleton draconians and skeletal draconians. They were not as powerful as abominations, but if they charged into the infantry formation, they could still cause a lot of damage. It was a waste to use the 88mm cannons to blast these things. The Bofors were just right. The thick and continuous cannons easily tore these big bones into pieces. Closer. It was getting closer. When they entered the range of the mortars, the entire Alliance's position was filled with the sound of cannons. If the soldiers did not put on earplugs in advance, they would probably all be deaf. At this time, they could only communicate with hand signals and lights. The Katyusha, 88mm cannons, Bofors, and mortars worked together from far to near, from top to bottom, forming an extremely powerful firepower net. In an instant, the losses of the Calamity Army on the plateau increased rapidly. On average, for every Calamity soldier that charged to the front of the Alliance's infantry position at the foot of the mountain, at least 5 Calamity soldiers would be destroyed halfway. The next thing the undead army faced was the steel colossus at the front of the line of defense. These mechanical giants from Oder Mimmelin's workshop brandished their huge arms, and every time they swept across, they would scatter multiple undyings. Chapter 1694. There was not a single Alliance soldier in the first 3 trenches of the infantry position. The one station there were the mechanical dwarfs and mechanical gnomes under Mimirin's command. They were either using electric shocks or operating the new flamethrowers provided by the Alliance to destroy the Scourge soldiers with extreme efficiency. In Duque's estimation before coming to the Icecrown Glacier, this was already an almost invincible formation. Unfortunately, there were too many Scourge soldiers. The seemingly impregnable front line of defense would always be broken through within a few minutes. This was because the bottom of the plateau of the Icecrown Glacier was almost completely hollowed out by the spider demons belonging to the Scourge army. Those rushing over from the plateau were just bait. Soon the real attack began. Near the first line of defense, Hundreds of huge pits that could fit a tank suddenly appeared. Middle-level Scourge soldiers rushed out like marching ants. At the same time, dark clouds quickly flew over from the opposite side. They looked like dense locusts, but in fact, they were gargoyles that were even more exaggerated than a swarm of locusts. Any attack would not be less than 10,000. Tens of thousands? Hundreds of thousands? The Alliance soldiers seemed to have an illusion that the Scourge army had pulled out all the corpses and skeletons that had died in Azeroth over the past tens of thousands of years to become soldiers. It was no wonder. After all, in their eyes, it was as if all they could see were skeleton soldiers with tattered armor and no flesh. The zombie tide seemed to connect the sky and the earth. No matter how many times they faced such a sea of zombies, they still felt their scalps go numb every time they saw it. Boom. The heavy artillery at the rear of the Alliance's position began to roar. As the model of the Alliance's shotgun, once the Type 3 shell hit, a small area of the air would suddenly be cleared. Bang. 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 When the most threatening group of gargoyles attacked, all the 40mm Bofors had no choice but to turn to the sky and fire. On the plateau to the east, the octuple bang cannons and Dongfeng anti-aircraft cannons that had long been prepared were the same. Countless gargoyles were hit by the cannons and were instantly torn into pieces, falling from the sky. However, this was meaningless. As long as the Lich King's magic power was not exhausted, there were as many gargoyles as he wanted. At first, the Alliance would still send griffins and hippogriffons to intercept them. There were too many casualties. The cruel exchange made every Alliance general's heart turn cold. The most disgusting thing was that if the griffins that died in the Ice Crown Glacier were not treated with holy water in time, they would immediately turn into bone griffins and turn around to slaughter the Allied troops. The dragons of the Dragon Slumber Shrine could suppress the gargoyles, whose claws could hardly penetrate the scales and skin of the adult dragons. Dragons had the advantage of crushing their ranks. Unfortunately, there were too many gargoyles, and the giant dragons couldn't kill them all. Therefore, the Alliance's regular air force only lasted for 3 days before retreating. Replacing them were the Karaj bug people that Duque had specially found in on Karaj. Although the twin emperors had temporarily knelt down, Duque's dominance over the Karaji insect people had not fundamentally changed. Duque rarely used these insects, especially when Bao Bing played with the Sea of Insects. The biggest reason was that the Sea of Zergs didn't explode on a whim. The Insect Queen was ready-made. The price for the Insect Queen to ovulate and give birth to small insects was a large amount of meat. This meant that once Bao Bing went berserk, the entire area would be barren, all the animals would be killed, and all the corpses would be devoured. In the Eastern Kingdom mainland or Kalimdor, Duque didn't dare to play with the Sea of Insects. That was tantamount to suicide. In Northrend, Duque didn't have so many scruples. When surrounding the Scourge army in the Ice Crown Glacier, Duque directly let the 2 Karaj insect queens build nests in the Howling Fjord and the Grizzly Hills. After strictly forbidding the insects from attacking people with the Alliance and Horde emblems, the insect people ate happily, at the cost of the remaining Vrykul people in the area, and the extinction of all the wild animals in the Grizzly Hills. Duque finally got a flying insect army of a total of 1 million. In the sky, the gargoyles that passed through the dense curtain wall of anti-aircraft artillery, and the interception of the giant dragon army, began to dive towards the Alliance's position. However, they were intercepted by the Karaj flying insects that were as dense as a swarm of locusts. Often, the 2 air forces in the sky intersected like lightning, and the winner was already decided. The broken limbs of the losers fell to the front of the position like dumplings falling into a pot. This kind of battle damage that was measured in hundreds every minute was a spectacular sight to behold. For the Alliance soldiers on the mountain wall defense line, this was a great pressure, because as the last air defense line, the Karaj insect people, was broken through, they had to face a double attack from the sky and from the ground. Sometimes, when they were firing, a gargoyle suddenly swooped down from the sky and cut off their head. This was already considered a kind of luck. The most tragic time was when a recruit was hooked by the sharp claws of a gargoyle and was directly taken into the air with a hoarse scream. A group of gargoyles swarmed up and directly tore off his limbs. This was not the end. The gargoyle was probably under the command of a lich, and was spreading fear in the Alliance's camp. It grabbed the wailing man and swung him around in the sky. No anti-air cannons were able to hit him, until an elven ranger shot the unlucky guy to death. Even so, the Scourge army still turned the poor guy into an immortal, and then threw him back to the Alliance's position like a worm. But now, with the army of winged insects fighting the sea of gargoyles, the Alliance's infantrymen were much safer. They carried out their duties and repeated the actions of loading mortar shells and aiming mechanically. They used cannons, flamethrowers, grenades, and everything else they could think of to stop the tide of the undead army. In the sky more than 10 kilometers behind them, the battleships began to fire. The 400mm cannons brought about a destructive explosion. The largest area of the Scourge army on the plateau was wiped out. The violent explosion even collapsed the tunnel dug by the spider demons. It seemed that the Alliance had found the location of the frontline commander of the Scourge army, and used heavy artillery to clear the area, directly destroying the Lich. The offensive of the Scourge army immediately stopped. The Lich King could indeed control any of the immortals in the Scourge army, but he couldn't divide his attention into 10 million parts and carry out precise control and command of every soldier. He could only make a general order, such as ordering 100,000 immortals to attack a certain area. As for which bunker and which cannon formation to attack, in fact, it still required the immortal commanders of different classes to carry out on-the-spot commands. Once they were eliminated, the Scourge army would be a bunch of blind flies and would be much easier to deal with. Seeing that the attack was ineffective, the Lich at the back stopped commanding, and allowed the low-level immortals to be sent to their deaths. When the sound of the cannons gradually stopped, the earth elemental creatures under Alkavon started to take the field. They weren't cleaning up the battlefield, but the land around them. It was because of them that the Alliance could avoid being dug by the spider demons to the rear. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.